people can get a good look at you. There's an election on, Jeff. It's important. Have you got slides? Have you got slides yet? Good. Yeah. It's all in the delivery. Let me take it. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? For those of us who went to the dinner last night, I hope you're feeling, energised by the wonderful food and drink and Jeff's fantastic speech. For those of you who missed out, hopefully you can make it next year. It was a great night and a great day yesterday, I think, but today, several people already said they're looking forward to today even more. Let's see how we go. The first session is about labour, services and the new economy. So touches on some of what Nathan Schneider was talking about in the beginning of yesterday. This is real, and what I was talking about. We're not old school, we're new school, and there's a whole lot of exciting ways that cooperative and cooperative enterprise is taking off in the last 10 years and as we speak. We've got 5 great speakers. 2 are online and 3 are here, and they're going to speak for 10, 15 minutes or so each, and then we'll have time for discussion following the usual pattern from yesterday. First up is Sebastian Paul, who's online from Belgium. Sebastian's the Director of Development of Smart Cooperative. Our conference 3 years ago, we had a presentation from Smart, and it is an amazing cooperative that spans across Europe. Sebastian will tell you more about it, but with tens of thousands of member employees and an amazing economic force now across the European Union. Sebastian's been really there from the start, or when it started in France, since in 2009. They're very supportive, and one of his roles is to develop and to support other people who want to set up similar co-ops like Smart in other places. But he's now based in the HQ in Belgium, working on development and a number of things in the Smart Cooperative. I'll leave him to talk to you about that, but please welcome Sebastian Paul.
Thank you. Good morning from Brussels. Good morning, Sydney. It's 1 o'clock in the night here, and you can see the Atomium. I'm not live from the Atomium, but it's a nice place. I will try to share a presentation and share my screen. Hope it works. Oops. You should see a red screen and presentation. So I will talk about Smart. Our baseline is something like a platform that is offering mutualized services and social protection for autonomous workers. You can see our website if you want to browse. This is my name, Sebastian Paul. I'm now also head of finance and development in Brussels, and you have my email if you want to contact after. The story, I know I have only 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but I will try to be short and go fast. It's a project from Belgium in 1998, and we started with artists only at the beginning. And around 2015, we opened Smart to every kind of different sectors. So now we're working with different people, a lot of different people, and a broad range of different sectors. And the principle of SMART is that we use IT tools. We have members, we have users, and these users, they can declare their work, they can employee, and we, SMART, we are their employer. So they invoice through SMART. And the concept and the solution is that with this, because they are our employee, we can offer them better social security package, so they have access to social protection, and we manage together the risk linked to the freelancing together. They stay autonomous. They are working in a share, what we call a share company, and we develop some things that are really interesting, really appealing for people, like a mutual guarantee fund. It means that 7 days after they finish their job, they are paid. Our members, a lot of our members are dealing with really complex legal issues. They are working abroad. They have different roles. Sometimes they are employer, sometimes they are employee. They have irregular income. They are mobile. So they are managing a lot of risk and a lot of administration. Our business model, or we work, we are invoicing, and we are not really invoicing. We are invoicing the clients, but we are keeping 6.5% of the amount they invoice our users. We are keeping 6.5% for our services. All these revenues, they cover our operational costs, and we are also investing into mutualized services. These mutualized services, this is financial support, this is administration legal support, and this is also development, new kind of services. I will talk about the creative hubs in a few moments. And also European development, because we are not only in Belgium, we are also in France, Spain, Sweden, Austria, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And we are in this country with other co-ops that are run with partners. Our impact, we have more than 25,000 shareholders in Belgium. The General Assembly is next week. We have almost more than 2,000 full-time equivalent in Belgium. We are one of the biggest company employing people in Brussels. We are present in 8 countries, and the turnover, we are invoicing 180 million euro in Belgium, and 225, 230 in Europe. France is the second country with 25 million euro. And we have in Brussels and in Belgium, we have 10, 12 offices, different offices. We have more than 200 what we call mutualized workers. They are support workers that are working for everyone. What we call Let's COP, it's all, each year we have a General Assembly. All of our members can buy a share of 30 euro. Each year it's more than, I think last year it was something like 600,000 euro of shares each year. We are a multi-stakeholder co-op. We have, of course, freelancers. We have the permanent, the mutualized workers. We have partners. We have the client of the freelancers. And each year, this 1,000 people, it was before COVID, of course, but each year our General Assembly, it's a yearly appointment with more than 1,000 people, a lot of different workshops, keynotes, and debates. And this is a moment of gathering. And also because the members ask for that, we developed 2 different creative hubs. One in Lille, in France, in north of France, Bazar Sanso. It's more than 4,000 meters square. It's a hub for social economy, social business, with more than 200 permanent workers, not only smart people, but different company. And we also have a place in Brussels called La Vallée. It's more than 6,000 meters square. It's a creative hubs with workshop for artists. They have studio, they have office space, and we're also connected in the neighborhood. We are, of course, working with what we call, but everybody is calling them new type of workers, gig workers. A lot of people working for Smart with Smart have different jobs, multiple jobs. We also have the artists working for the bikers, the delivery services. This is something we worked a lot with them because we help them in a certain way to organize and to defend their rights and to be employed by Smart and they have better social condition. And we talked with Deliveroo and this kind of services to increase the quality of work and increase the working conditions, improve, sorry. We don't consider ourselves as IT company, but of course, technology for us is important. We have an old tool, but the tool for us is really important because we are using a tool that we change the scale of the company Smart at the beginning, and we can offer the solution to a larger public. And also it's because we have a tool that it's, I would say, only 6.5%, the price, the cost of Smart. And also, but you should know about that, of course, we are involved into the platform co-ops movement. And this is, you can see the logo of a platform co-op movement in Brussels with a company like EasyToo also. And we believe it's, of course, it's the future and the digital economy needs to be more inclusive. We started some social experimentation. I already talked about the bikers. This was something really important for us 3 or 4 years ago in Brussels because we helped the bikers to improve their working conditions. And we had a trial with Deliveroo and Take It Easy. It's a Belgian small company. We had a trial because they wanted to stop the collaboration with us and the bikers, and we won this trial. And also we are developing what we call permanent contracts. It's because we use, of course, it's project, people working on a project basis. So we try to work differently with some of them that have a lot of small project and small contracts, short-term contracts. And we try to transform in a certain way small contracts, small short-term contracts in a long-term contracts, in a permanent contracts, and to avoid unstable jobs. And this is something we are running at the moment with the Brussels region. I will finish. This is my last slide. It's some concern, something we are involved in, our what we can say called lobbying actions. Of course, the collaborative economy, but on I will say a co-op collaborative economy and not a predatory one. Of course, the solidarity. And to increase and to develop social cooperation. Also, we are involved on a European level with what we call the developing a homogeneous welfare system in Europe. And last, this kind of experiments like the long-term contracts with the bikers, We defend the right to conduct some social experiments at a national and European level. Thank you very much. This is a broad presentation. I will be happy to answer questions if you have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sebastian. Let's have you, there you are, great. We're going to do questions at the end, so save them up for now. We'll move on to the next speaker, which is Councillor Jess Scully. She's the Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Sydney, elected to Council in 2016 and elected as the Deputy Lord Mayor in 2019. Jess has a great history in the creative arts. She's been a public art curator, a policy advisor, a radio host, a magazine editor, and she's an author as well. She published her first book last year, Glimpses of Utopia. I think nearly every chapter, Jess, ends with, and there should be more co-ops or something like that. So she's definitely travelling with us on the journey. Please welcome Councillor Jess Scully.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks, Sebastian. That was fantastic. I am a lifelong slashy. So I wish I'd had a platform like Smart to take advantage of as I navigated my career and tried to create a sustainable and, actually economically viable career as an arts worker and in the creative industries. It's something I think that's been sorely lacking for a really long time. So I'm really excited to see it. And I understand the City of Sydney is really interested in supporting Smart to expand into Sydney as well. So that's really, really exciting to hear about. So I'm here as a typical slashy with lots of hats on, but my two key hats are drawing on some of the ideas that I had explored and learnt from people all over the world, including from Louise Crabtree, who's here today, in Glimpses of Utopia, but also the work that I'm doing at the City of Sydney. And I might come to some of the work in the book in our discussion and as we talk more about the new economy. But I want to talk to you about the work that I'm doing at the City of Sydney and what my hope and goal is with the work at the City of Sydney that I think will help enable this more democratic approach to the economy. I also want to play a role in providing a counterpoint, I think, to some of the perceptions that people have about cooperatives, in that some people think that they're mostly kind of regional, productive, focused on the agricultural economy. I think a lot of people think, oh, that's something that was really big at a certain era. It was really big in the 70s is what I hear from some people. But what I want to do is to really play a role in helping to bring more people into the awareness that we have, that cooperatives are a business model for the 21st century. And cooperatives have an important role to play in making sure that the new economy that we're being thrust into is actually a generative economy that serves society and serves people, and not an extractive economy that is operating to our detriment and that is pulling wealth away from local communities and sending it offshore into tropical islands and to a few owners who might be in Silicon Valley. You know, that's not the kind of economy that we should be raving about or supporting. So how, at a local government level, can we play a better role in supporting, enabling, procuring from and promoting this generative and democratic economy? And so that's really what I want to focus on here today. I think that the City of Sydney can become the best customer and best participant in local government in the democratic economy, and I want to work with you all to make that a reality. Also, we have seen a rise in a focus on social enterprise, and I think social enterprise is really important as well. But I think there's a real difference between social enterprise and the cooperative sector and the democratic economy. And I think I've heard cooperatives described as the sort of slow food on the social economy table. This idea that rather than having an emphasis on outcomes, cooperatives really focus as well on inputs. And they focus on the processes and not just the outcomes or the effects. It's not just the end justifies the means with cooperatives. Cooperatives are about having an inclusive process that people participate in as equals, as collaborators, rather than competitors, which is what we see primarily in the version of the new economy that we're being told to be so excited about. The other thing is that a more democratic economy is a more sustainable and more resilient economy, and that's something that became really obvious last year. We know that mainstream startups have a 75 to 90% failure rate in the first 5 years, whereas a modest survey of co-ops by the Office of Fair Trading clocked survival at about 55% in the same period. In the UK, it's an 80% survival rate. And a recent study by Sydney Uni found that the average lifespan of an Australian cooperative is 25 years. So while they can take a little bit longer to get going, they last the distance. And that's what I want in the City of Sydney. I want us to be investing in and supporting businesses that are here to last and to contribute in the long term. We also found during the crisis that while enterprises that were focused on purpose did suffer because they tended to be at the front line of service delivery in the care economy, in a lot of the sectors that really did have to do more with less last year, 96% of them are still trading, and they are predicting, 90% of them are predicting a return to pre-COVID levels within 18 months. So some of them, 75% of them, said that they have even discovered potential to grow as a result of this crisis that we've been through. So let me tell you about some of the work that I'm doing and how I'd like the cooperative sector to play a role and participate at the City of Sydney. One of the first things that I did on being elected was to encourage the City of Sydney to adopt a local procurement policy. So at the City of Sydney, we spend $570 million a year beyond our expenditure on wages. So that is on services and goods in our local economy. Of that, about 54% is procured within our local government area. And then about 30% of that comes from the LGAs immediately around us. So that's a significant spend. And I'll give you a bit of a breakdown of where that money goes. About 35% of that spend is locked into long-term strategic contracts with big suppliers, so the people who do our cleaning, who manage the pools, who do the parks contracts. 56% of our spend is with with suppliers on mid-term contracts of it's on suppliers of contracts of $250,000 or more. There's 252 suppliers on those mid-term contracts. But the biggest opportunity for cooperatives, I think, comes about in contracts under 250K. And that's because there is a less onerous procurement process for engaging with the council at that level of spend. We have 6,000 suppliers who are engaging with us in that category. And it's about 9% of our total spend. And that is still $48.6 million. So it's not a small pool. But how do we increase the diversity of the businesses that are coming to us as suppliers and that are benefiting from that spend? That's the problem that I'd like you to work with us to solve. And then, of course, there's our contracts under $50,000, which don't need to go to procurement, which are really just signed off by managers within the business. And so we really need you to be more visible, and we need our staff to be more aware of the multiple benefits that cooperatives provide as suppliers to the City of Sydney. At the moment, only 12% of our small to medium enterprises in the city are actually registered through our key platform, which is called Tenderlink. And we need to change that dynamic. We need to get more cooperatives and more small businesses actually engaging with the city as suppliers. There's a few ways that we do that, and there's one platform I want to tell you about in particular, because I think there's a huge opportunity for them to better recognise the multiple values and benefits that cooperatives bring. There's a new platform called Giveable. Has anyone come across Giveable? So this is a female-led and female business-focused platform, but what they're trying to do is to become the attachment attachment back end to the procurement process. Essentially, the idea is that you submit all of your information onto that platform, and then they use that platform in order to become those attachments to all of the supplier documents that you're required to submit. If you could engage with an organisation like Giveable and make sure that they recognise the multiple benefits that cooperatives bring to the community, and actually perhaps even have a certain category for cooperatives, that could have a huge impact in the flow-on effect, because organisations like the Commonwealth Bank, for example, are now starting to use Giveable as their procurement back end when they're doing when they're engaging with potential suppliers. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. The other thing I want to share with you is the work that we're doing on community wealth building. So just before the pandemic, I encouraged the city and moved a motion to get the city to develop a community wealth building policy. And I'm really glad to say that policy is in draft now. I just reviewed it and made some contributions to it, hopefully after having a conversation with Melina Morrison from BCCM. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the cooperative sector to feature really prominently in our community wealth building approach. What I'd like to see is for the City of Sydney to become a key anchor institution and to bring the university sector, the hospital sector, everyone from the airports to some of the big supermarkets and chains that operate in our local government area to actually operate as anchor institutions in our local economy. It's something that I think is going to have a huge impact in changing the way that people in our local area understand how wealth is created and distributed and shared in our local economy. Because at the moment, I think there's not really an understanding that there is a better way of doing business. And people don't understand how benefits can flow and be retained within the local economy when we do have anchor institutions like the city. So I'm hoping that will go on exhibition in the next few months, and I'd really appreciate the cooperative sector contributing to that policy document as much as you can, because I want to make sure that you have a really strong presence in our community wealth building approach. And then lastly, I want to tell you a bit about what we are doing to help incubate and support new businesses, particularly in the democratic economy. I'm really pleased to say that we're working with Sam and a range of bike couriers on a new cooperative-owned bike courier business, which I know you heard about yesterday. And I'm really glad that they are going to be one of the, I think, more democratically owned solutions to the food delivery and the product delivery situation that we're encountering in the gig economy. And we're also really focused on Indigenous procurement. So we're working with Supply Nation. Our goal by 2030 is to spend $2 million a year with Indigenous-owned businesses. At the moment, we're at just under $1 million a year that we're spending with Indigenous-owned businesses. But I think there's a real connection, a point of connection to be made between the cooperative sector and Indigenous-owned businesses. And I know there's some really important Indigenous-owned enterprises in the City of Sydney, like Tramby, for example. And so I want to see how can the city be a supporter and hopefully a customer of some of those Indigenous-owned, cooperatively owned businesses as well. So look, there's so much more that we could talk about around procurement, and it's funny, coming from a creative industries background, I really didn't think that my two favourite things in local government were going to be procurement and land value, but it turns out they're the two things I'm most interested in now, and I really see those two aspects of our work and how we can intervene in a market that's dysfunctional in both of those instances. Is a way that we can actually build a fairer and more inclusive and more locally generative economy. So I'm really keen to learn from you all today and to understand how the city can play a better role in supporting the democratic economy. So thank you.
I think Jess might have a few people approaching her at the end of the session, so prepare yourself. But that's great, thanks very much. The next speaker is back up online, Godfrey Mose. He's an Executive Director of the United Workers Union. He's brought a friend. He's down in Melbourne, so that's why he's online today. So he's at the United Workers Union that represents workers across the private and public sector. but he's also the co-founder of Cooperative Power Australia. So that's where the rubber hits the road in the cooperative sense from Godfrey. So please welcome Godfrey and his dear friend.
Thank you. So joys of working from home. Thanks very much for having me. While I've got a very long-standing interest, more than interest, a passion in how we can get the cooperative sector and the union movement to work together better, and how I think it's very relevant from a not only a macro perspective but also a micro perspective. The reason that I really want to hone in on today is the insecure work element of this panel, and I think as the union leader, it's probably incumbent upon me to really delve into that and how it relates to platform cooperatives. And what I want to talk about is the rise of insecure and precarious and casual labour, and how it's arisen, why it's arisen, and therefore hopefully to better situate platform cooperatives and cooperative solutions in that. And if there's one takeaway that I would like you to all bear in mind in terms of what my opinion is and what my experience is in this, is when it comes to the rise of insecure work, it's not driven by the technology, it's driven by the social relationships. Yes, technology is driving some unemployment, and we as a union have experienced good quality union jobs that have been blown away because of technology. One example, for instance, is Woolworths in Hume in Broadmeadows in Melbourne's northern suburbs. It closed down in 2019. Essentially, that was 500 mostly very good union jobs. And Woolworths opened up a new highly automated distribution centre in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs and replaced those 500 jobs with 200 jobs. So that is an example of technology displacing jobs. And what's also interesting is what happened to those people, which in the main is not particularly different and tragically not different to what happens to workers at workplaces like distribution centres and factories that close down. And what happened to those people was that rates of insecure work doubled. Mostly people didn't go and work in the new distribution centre. They had to go and try and find work where they were and where they lived. And so underemployment in that cohort of those workers increased quite significantly. Now, I'm saying that technology is not the main driver of that. And why is that? Well, we've got to look to Broadmeadows as an example of a community in a broader context. And that is traditionally what would have happened to those workers 10, 15, 20 years ago, if they could no longer work at that distribution centre in Broadmeadows, they would have literally gone down the road and gotten a job at the Ford factory in Broadmeadows. And so the decline of secure work, the rise of insecure work, and the role that technology plays in that cannot be divorced from deindustrialisation and the way in which we organise our economy today and corporate dominance of that economy. I've had a lot of experience, unfortunately, of other examples in my union work of workers who've gone from permanent jobs and secure jobs, had a factory closure, had a workplace closure, and gone on to insecure work. A few examples over the years that I've had, Ingham's in McLaren Vale shut down a turkey factory 6 weeks before Christmas. And that sounds like the plot to a heartwarming Christmas movie, but it's not. The factory did end up closing down. Interestingly, what happened with those workers? I want to tell you about one worker, Rick. Rick was a permanent worker. He was a turkey boner at that factory in McLaren Vale. What ended up happening to Rick a year or two later after that factory closure, he went from a permanent job working at that factory to a casual seasonal labourer picking grapes in the McLaren Vale region. Now, what happened in between was really interesting in the sense that Rick was the project officer for the putative cooperative project that we won funding for in coalition with local farmers. And Rick did a whole lot of very high level work in terms of arranging potential sellers, business plans, dealing with consultants, bookended by being a permanent turkey boner and at the other end, a seasonal grape worker. Another experience I had was dealing with the corporatisation of Murray Goulburn. And arguably my experience with Murray Goulburn in its cooperative governance has only reinforced my very strong opinion that cooperatives are a lot stronger when workers are involved rather than workers as just employees. But that's by the by. I bring up Murray Goulburn because at its corporate kind of tail end, one of the strategies that the management had to try and save the group was to close down a few factories. One of those factories was Edith Creek in Tasmania. Edith Creek is a small community where Burnie is the nearest town. It's an hour away, and there's not a lot of other job options there. That place shut down for a couple of years. Interestingly though, there were buyers who wanted to take that factory from the get-go. There were buyers who wanted to essentially employ all those workers and continue it on. I raise that specific example for two reasons. Number one is that example where corporations shut down factories, try and consolidate production into a small number of factories, and then essentially dictate what happens, or more relevantly, what doesn't happen on that land with those workers skills, drives a lot of wasted opportunity, a lot of insecure work. And this is not just talking about things that might have happened in 2014 or 2017. In my direct experience as a union official, in the last 12 months, so height of pandemic, I am dealing with height of pandemic and climate crisis, ExxonMobil closing its Altona refinery. And yes, there's an energy transition that is being made and needs to happen quicker. But the thing about oil refinery workers is that oil refinery workers are hugely skilled at the processes that you need to refine green hydrogen. Those ExxonMobil workers, they only stayed open, that plant, because it's relatively small, 20 years after everyone thought they would close, because ExxonMobil effectively didn't just use that plant to export and refine oil. It used that plant to export workers to its facilities around the world to upskill a whole lot of those workers. And now they've said, that's gone, we don't need to keep them anymore. And we have 200 highly skilled advanced manufacturing energy workers that could be put to a just transition and an energy transition who will be dispersed like dandelion seeds over the next few months. Pfizer in Perth, closing down its pharmaceutical facility in 2023. There's a lot of vaccines that need to be made and a whole lot of advanced pharmaceutical workers who face an uncertain future. GSK and Boronia in Melbourne, same thing's happening. They're closing down very soon. Hopefully there might be a buyer. I raise all of this and bring it back to cooperatives for this very simple reason. It is the biggest barrier we have at the moment in order to work, in order to do all the things that we need to do as a society, all the pressing needs that we've had. We've never had, post-World War II, as high rates as underemployment as globally, as we've never had as declining productivity globally, declining manufacturing share, and global stagnation as we have in this particular present juncture. And I'm not talking about the noise of what bounces around from quarter to quarter. I'm talking about longer term trends. So on the one hand, we have a whole bunch of people who need work, who are looking for work, regardless of whether they're technically unemployed or underemployed. And we have a whole lot that needs to be done, and it's not being done. And why is it not being done? It's not being done because of corporate power. When I deal with political advisors, and I'll finish off on this note because I'm coming up to my 10 minutes. When I deal with political advisors in various levels, could be local councils, could be state governments, could be federal governments. When you raise an issue like Murray Goulburn shutting down Edith Creek in Tasmania and the fact that there are buyers, and Murray Goulburn wants to just shut down the factory so a competitor doesn't come in and undermine their market share. Or the ExxonMobil example, where we have hundreds of skilled advanced manufacturing workers who could be put to the whose skills and expertise could be put to the public interest in building up post-carbon energy systems. One thing always comes back, this mental blockage. We can't do that because that's the private property of that corporation. We are letting corporations determine whatever it is that they want to do. And when it comes to platform cooperatives, the sexy bit is not the platform. The sexy bit is the 19th century bit, the cooperative, because that is just as relevant today as unions are just as relevant today. Insecure and precarious labour today looks very similar to insecure and precarious labour pre-World War II. The Hungry Mile at the waterfront is not very far removed from what happens with labour hire workers cycling in and out of warehouses, except the difference is people don't line up, they've got smartphones. The platform economy, in terms of personal services, is not miles away from the armies of domestic labour in the 19th century. If we want to get out of where we are today, that we can put the platforms to use, but we've got to get the social relationship right first. And that's why part of what I do is to be a cooperator as well. And I want to end on a hopeful note. And that is, let me just share a screen. That is the fact that unions are getting our heads around cooperatives a bit more. Not quick enough, not enough, I would say at present. But for instance, United Workers Union has set up a member enterprise cooperative in the electricity system with a whole bunch of other unions, community groups, community energy groups, other cooperatives, ENGOs. It's at cooperativepower.org.au. So the cooperative solution is vital and it's pressing, but we can't get too distracted by the technology without getting the social relationships right first. So thanks very much. I'll press stop share there.
Thanks a lot, Godfrey. We're just going to keep ploughing through our great panel. Next to speak is Yasmin Catley MP, the member, the Labor member for New South Wales member for Swansea. Yasmin, well, originally trained as a librarian. Yes, that's when I first met you actually, but a long time ago. A lifelong unionist, was elected to State Parliament in 2015, yes, please welcome Yasmin Catley.
Thanks so much, Sam. And Peter, thank you very much for having me here today. I'd first and foremost like to acknowledge the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge those traditional owners of the area that I represent, the Awabakal and the Darkinjung people. Look, co-ops are something that I do have a deep passion for, and I think going to Godfrey's point in relation to the values around co-ops are very similar to the values of the trade union movement, and as Sam has said, something that I have been involved in all of my working life, in fact all of my life. Godfrey, you'll be pleased to know, or maybe not so much, but my family are waterside workers, and they certainly were at the Hungry Mile during that period. And in fact, my mother's side of the family lived in Millers Point. So I have a very deep history of working people and the struggles of working people. And like Godfrey said, I see now very similar operations going on in our society today. Like when I came to Parliament, I came with the view that I would leave Parliament with the society that I'd represented being better than when I went in. And I'm not seeing that, sadly. And a lot of that is because of the corporate greed that Godfrey mentioned. And I think, and also because we as legislators and regulators are allowing that to happen, and that has to change. So I wanted to talk to you in relation to co-ops and how important they are, and how important our role is in the New South Wales Parliament of making sure the rules are fair, the rules are equal, and that cooperatives can survive and flourish indeed, because they are critically important in our communities. Of course, I've just mentioned about the history and the values of the labour movement and how entwined they are with the history of cooperatives in Australia, particularly in regional communities. And I represent a regional community and have mostly lived in regional New South Wales all of my life, and understand how important cooperatives can be in those regions. And in fact, of course, Robert's here from the fishing co-op. There's a co-op right in Swansea in the electorate that I represent. So, Robert, thank you for all the work you do in our local area. In fact, I used to live around the corner from the fishermen that were part of the co-op when I grew up, and we'd hear what we'd call the putt-putt boat come in every morning. And, you know, that community provided seafood, which was the cheapest thing to buy back in the day, believe it or not. Now, of course, everything's turned on its head and it's much more expensive. But they have been a critical part of the community that I represent all of my life. So the labour movement and the cooperative, of course, have worked together, united with shared values to support communities. That's really where they come from, and help people to mobilise their cooperative power. And we must, again, into the future, make sure and help tackle the challenges that our communities face. Over the past several decades, we have seen the increasing rise of casualisation in the labour market, particularly in the service sector, which of course Godfrey touched on. And can I just say, this is leaving people in insecure work. And as we saw, no more obvious to us during the COVID pandemic, the disastrous impacts that that time of crisis had on us. I mean, we will all remember those distressing scenes of people lined up outside of Centrelink. Many of those were casual workers that one day they had a job and the next day they were lined up outside of Centrelink. Many who had never lined up outside of Centrelink before, and from those sectors that were incredibly vulnerable, and in particular I mentioned the service industry. And look, the increasing role of casualisation in the labour market and the rise of the gig economy has been brought about by decades of conservative governments, undermining job security, and quite frankly, attacking the rights of workers and their wages. And the complete embrace of neoliberalism has stacked the deck, in actual fact, against the average worker, and has overall definitely left them worse off. Unfortunately, the rise of casualisation has led to wage stagnation, and there's no better example of that than we see right here in New South Wales, with the government making a decision to actually cap state public sector wages. This is not only leaving workers worse off, but it is also really bad economic policy. It is definitely a handbrake on the economy. The casualisation of the labour market and the rise of the gig economy is undermining the collective bargaining power of workers, along with being a potential threat to existing cooperatives. And we've seen that, for instance, and I know it's not all a cooperative now, but in the taxi industry, for instance, and with the rise of companies like Uber. And I use Uber because it's a direct correlation in that particular market. But it's in this space that we, as people who are legislators, need to make sure that we get the balance right. We've of course seen the popularity of Uber rise incredibly rapidly, and Roy Morgan found in just 2019 that the popularity of Uber had surpassed those of taxis. However, the regulation around the taxi industry is significant. I was speaking to the Taxi Council just yesterday because there's legislation coming to Parliament on Tuesday, and it's in relation to insurance. And the taxis are classified as a Class 7 vehicle and automatically attract a $5,500 insurance policy. Uber drivers are a Class 1 vehicle, the same as you or I with our vehicles. They attract an insurance of $500. Like, the disparity economically is extraordinary, and we have to make sure that as legislators and regulators that we are looking at all of these complex issues and making sure there's a level playing field. But for taxi drivers, the rise of Uber, it has actually threatened their businesses and undermined the securities of their incomes. Airbnb is another company, and I use them again because they're one of the largest in that shared economy. But they've built a business model around the gig economy entirely, and it has not only undermined workers in the service industry, but it's also had an incredible impact on the price of real estate or the availability of rental markets right across the state, but particularly, can I tell you, that is the case in regional New South Wales. Look, I also want to recognise that myself and my colleagues probably a bit naively embraced the gig economy, but now we've actually seen it as having disastrous consequences for workers. So I think it's important as legislators that we make sure that we look at all of the sector before we start to jump in and make specifically making legislation around this area. But can I say to you that that is why also that Labor not only has a vision to rebuild industry in our state, but one which cooperatives could and should and must play a very important role. We are committed to developing a constructive way forward that includes a role for cooperatives. Earlier this year, I introduced the New South Wales Jobs First Bill. And like Jess, I didn't know I was going to come to the New South Wales Parliament and have a deep interest in procurement, but nonetheless, turns out that I do. And when I think about it and dig a bit deeper, that's because I come from an industrial town where we used to make things, and we used to make things very proudly. And we no longer do that, and we don't do that anymore because we build things in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in China, in Spain, and in France. And I see those products coming into play in the town that I live in Newcastle, and the tram going up the street that was once built in very proudly and very professionally just down the road at Broadmeadow, or indeed at Cardiff. So it was with that deep passion for workers' rights, and for my high respect and regard for manufacturing that I set about making sure that we start to build things here again. That extended to the procurement of New South Wales more generally. And like Jess said, this way of looking at a democratic economy is critically important, and you can do that through procurement because it is an imperative for the Government of New South Wales to look locally, look around you locally about what's available, and that of course will open up enormous opportunity for local manufacturers, local service industry, all of which co-ops can, should and must be part of, so that everybody has a little bit of stake in the game, and that everybody can work in what I love, that democratic economy. I love that phrase, so I will pinch that from you if that's all right, Jess. So look, I think that as the biggest customer in this state, that it is critical the role that a state government plays in all of this. And that is why I think that the government should use its significant power of procurement. And Jess gave us her figures of what the City of Sydney spends. New South Wales spends more than $34 billion. They are the biggest customer in this country. And we should make sure that that pie is certainly looked at first and foremost in New South Wales and then within the Australian borders. Can I say the bill that I'm very proud, it incentivises procurement from businesses which demonstrate a commitment to providing equal opportunity employment, along with stable, ongoing and permanent employment in New South Wales. All critically important measures to make sure that workers are getting a fair go and are actually being valued in the work that they do. There's also a New South Wales jobs advocate in there, a cop on the beat, because it's okay to put in place all of these policies, but unless you have somebody out there with the checks and balances ensuring that that the state government are actually moving forward with the policies and the legislation that you have in place, then there's no point actually having that. So the Jobs Advocate will ensure that the government is utilising local businesses and that those awarded government contracts are meeting their requirements under the Act. If the advocate believes an organisation is in breach of the Act, they have the power to order audits of that organisation. So not only are they a cop on the beat, but they've also got the powers to do something about it. The advocate will not only play a role in policing government contracts, but will work alongside local industry to facilitate access to government procurement opportunities. And this is a direct way to reach out to cooperatives to bring them into the contract bidding process. It can be daunting, we know that, but the advocate will be there to actually guide small business and the likes of co-ops through this. The Jobs Bill is a great opportunity, in my mind, for cooperatives to emerge to bid for government contracts and help provide stable and secure employment for workers in New South Wales. We could see groups of organisations, small businesses and individuals band together to form a cooperative to bid for government contracts, particularly, I again mention the service industry. We already see this in Australia with a large number of cleaning cooperatives in operation. Cooperative procurement has been underutilised by governments for far too long, and it's time to take advantage of the government and cooperatives working together to deliver the best outcome for workers and for our communities. The popularity of cooperatives has risen and it has fallen over decades, but I believe that cooperatives will play a crucial role in the future economy of our state. What I will say is that we are truly going back to the future, and I say also that let's start to get that, and I steal this from Godfrey, that social relationship happening. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Yasmin. And last but not least is Abigail Boyd, MLC, New South Wales Upper House member for the Greens. Abigail lives on the Central Coast as well, so we're well represented from north of the Hawkesbury. She was elected in 2019, is a lawyer, and her specialisation for 20 years was global banking regulation. But she's now in the New South Wales Parliament, focused on things about the economy, new economy, and certainly remains an expert on banking and progressive economic reform. Please welcome Abigail.
Hello. Thank you very much. It's an incredible pleasure to be here with you today, standing on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I acknowledge that this land was and always will be Aboriginal land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And I reflect, as I often do, that the sustainable economy that First Nations people created and lived in for tens of thousands of years before they were the victims of colonialism, capitalism and exploitation from the British invaders was and should continue to be a real inspiration. We have so much to learn from the original inhabitants of this land. So our current economic system is based on old-fashioned 19th century principles, crafted at a time before we knew very much about a lot of things, before we knew about global ecological systems, when our knowledge of human psychology was pretty rudimentary, and when we couldn't foresee the impacts of information technology on markets. And while we've made extraordinary advances in technology, medicine, science, research and innovation, the principles on which we run our economy have remained firmly stuck in the past. And the institutions and legal systems framed around this neoliberal capitalist version of an economy are stuck in the past along with it. The fact is that our current economic system has passed its use-by date. Not only is it the root cause of and continuing to exacerbate the current crises we face, particularly climate change and economic inequality, but the current capitalist system has also lost any claim to be a necessary evil, supportable on the basis that there aren't viable alternatives. There are a myriad of alternatives to the current economic system, and it gives me great comfort to see the growing number of progressive economists and the acceptance of views that are putting forward a different way of structuring our economy. So it's time to move to a more sustainable and productive economic system. And I firmly believe that the growth of the collaborative and cooperative sector is one of the keys to getting us there. So one of the biggest myths on which our current economic system is based is that we are naturally individualistic, competitive, and primarily driven by self-interest. And Kate Raworth, who I hope some of you are familiar with, refers to this as the rational economic man concept, which is embedded at the core of mainstream economics and the system that we find ourselves in today. Our focus on individuals as the driver of the economy can be seen in that obsession with the entrepreneur, the individual, the startup company, and our relative dismissal of collective pursuits. Thanks to decades of psychological research, we now have a much improved understanding of humanity, and we know that humans are in fact social beings. We are instinctively collaborative and cooperative. The knowledge that we are by nature cooperative not only highlights a significant flaw in the assumptions on which neoliberalism is based, but it also points us towards the shape that a new economic system could take. An economy that takes advantage of and fosters that collaborative spirit to bring about new levels of productivity, sustainability, and well-being, and one in which the private company model need no longer be the default business structure. We're often told that one of the benefits of capitalism is its historical ability to adapt to changing technologies. However, many of the assumptions underlying our current economic system simply don't hold true in the faces of advances in information technology. Advances in technology have meant that we can now allocate goods and services, matching buyers and sellers across towns, states, countries, the globe, with the click of a button, and vitally, without the need for profit-taking intermediaries. We can now predict demand for basic goods with impressive accuracy. Supermarkets, for example, only stock as much as their just-in-time inventory systems predict that they will sell, something that many of us didn't know about until the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. And we're not dealing with traditional widgets from mainstream economics textbooks anymore. Unlike products created using scarce resources, whether it be raw physical resources in the production chain or labour itself, a large part of our economy is now based on selling goods that can be produced in abundance, sold at prices that aren't anchored to the cost of production, and with a reproduction cost eventually nearing zero. The best example of this would be a song sold through, say, iTunes, which might cost a certain amount to make the first time, but then is replicated millions of times at minimal cost to a producer. This creates contradictions under mainstream economics, which assumes a limited amount of goods and prices and an allocation efficiency that is based on supply and demand. As a result of our stubborn adherence to capitalist principles, prices for these sorts of goods are set artificially, profit-seeking intermediaries persist, and the result is the income of artists decreasing while the shareholders of large corporations reap most of the reward. Rather than accepting that advances in information technology have reduced the need for intermediaries and allowed individuals to produce certain goods without significant capital outlay, we've instead forced capitalist norms into a space where there was no need for them and where they create even greater inequality. What's more, technology has allowed us to share things for free that used to cost money to obtain. Capitalism relies on ever-increasing amounts of economic growth, which in modern times has resulted in the commodification of more and more of those things that we used to take for free. Paying for education and health services and the use of our road system are just the tip of the iceberg. But think how easily Wikipedia replaced costly and quickly out-of-date printed encyclopedias. Not needing to own a printing press and distribution network, the internet has transformed the way we produce and distribute information. And we should be actively encouraging more of this collaborative economy to exist and sit alongside a dwindling capitalist sector, not allowing it to be monetized. Smartphones and the internet have allowed our work lives to blend into our home lives as we work from home and outside of set hours. But this technology has also enabled employers to minimize labor costs and to push the risks of patchy demand onto workers in the form of insecure and poorly paid work. One of the most notable and perhaps problematic examples of all of this technological innovation has been rideshare platforms, which we have heard about today. This kind of gig work has been lauded by many as the pinnacle of work-life balance, the apparent flexibility to work when you want and where you want, or to juggle numerous jobs at once. but the reality is not so rosy. In response to this kind of technological disruption, the response of policymakers has not been to embrace the opportunity for new business structures, but instead to attempt to apply capitalist principles to new scenarios and emerging markets. And the result of this policy failure is a continuation of the exploitation of workers, while shareholders reap the rewards of what is an entirely unnecessary profit skimming arrangement. There is no need for rideshare or delivery services to be run by businesses with this kind of structure. And the fact that they have been allowed to operate in this way shows a severe lack of imagination and foresight from our policymakers. In the process, we have facilitated capitalist enterprises grabbing new territory that would otherwise have been open to collaborative and open source enterprises. We should instead be fostering cooperative models of working in spaces where traditional capitalist firms are neither desirable nor necessary. And it's not like governments the world over, including here in New South Wales, aren't getting involved in developing centralised apps and other technologies, whether it's for themselves, for example, the Service New South Wales app, and I dread to think what they'll do with the data that's residing there at one point, or to facilitate the development of a new business opportunity. For example, I understand that the New South Wales government has recently been involved in developing an app to help private corporations provide parking services to local councils. But what hasn't been done, to my knowledge at least, is for government to step in and create those sorts of technology platforms to facilitate individuals to collaborate together. Their focus has been on the economic status quo, on supporting solely profit-seeking corporations. These are extraordinary opportunities for freeing ourselves of late-stage capitalism and moving towards a new economy, one in which we share the benefits of automation rather than fear it. And I'll put a plug in for a universal basic income and for increased leisure time, and to engage, thank you, and to engage in collaboration that is unshackled by the need to feed capitalist enterprises in order to feed ourselves. But it's not too late. We're still perfectly capable of turning things around with the right policy settings. And that is why the work that all of you do is so vital. By raising awareness of cooperatives, we raise awareness of what is possible outside of the economic status quo. As Paul Mason argues, there's nothing other than the predatory nature of the incumbent corporations and the spinelessness of legislators to stop us mandating the platform cooperative as the norm for minicab hiring or short-term property lets. Similarly, there is nothing to stop governments investing capital in co-ops and in other non-profit collaborative entities. We don't need governments to intervene to actively end the stranglehold that capitalist ventures have on our society. We just need space in which we can grow non-capitalist ventures alongside them, eventually making much of capitalism redundant. To do this, policymakers will need to leave 19th century economics where it belongs, facilitate people embracing their collaborative natures, and allow new institutions and ways of doing things to flourish. Thank you.
Thanks very much to all our speakers. Unfortunately, we have lost Sebastian from Belgium. I think it's now sort of 2:30 in the morning, so forgive him. His email is on the slides. If you want to contact us and address questions to him, we can certainly pass them on, but you'll be able to access his email and his contacts, and he's very willing and very open to hear from people. It's good. Godfrey is still there. Look, I just want to make a couple of quick comments before we go to questions. Just that it's always, as someone who works in the cooperative sector, it's just great to hear political support at any time, and it's just fantastic to hear from all the speakers today. But we do play the field, and we have a number of great supporters in the Liberal and National parties, and we did certainly invite them, but we weren't able to, and we've got a number of apologies for some of those. But just my final political comment. But we look for support wherever we can find it, and it's fantastic to have that support here today. Great. So we've got some minutes for questions, comments. People are already at the microphones, which is the model. For you guys on stage, there are microphones too. You've each got one. Yep. Just switch them on when you're up. and we'll get into it. First, Jane. Yep.
Hi, Godfrey. It's Jane Oldham from Ningana Housing Collective in Annandale in Sydney. Thanks very much for that. Do you see any possibility for your union or maybe Australian unions, I think that's the peak body for Unions Australia, anyway, to putting together something like SMART, that our first speaker explained to us?
Yeah, I think there is a possibility that could occur. It's just the main issue that that Australians have to deal with is the fact that we are currently in crisis in terms of our role is not particularly socially legitimised. The regulatory system that we have to deal with by volume and intent is quite frankly more akin to a soft authoritarian government than any industrialised democracy. And so what that means is getting the mental bandwidth of key union leaders to open up and look further on the horizon is a challenge. And I think that is, I would suggest that that's probably a key part of why unions have to deal with the present system, because it stops us from being as transformative as we can be. I know that I've previously taken the SMART model to other key union leaders who have more freelance coverage than we do in our particular union, so people in the creative spaces, and there is interest there. So I think it might occur, but it would need to occur, I think, in the context of a more strategic dialogue between the union movement leadership and cooperative movement leadership to work out what can we do to make more cooperatives possible, and how can we work through the relationship between unions and cooperatives on the ground, because I think that institutional piece needs to happen first.
I must just come in on that too. So we've certainly been, there's been other unions in considering the SMART model, and it's certainly on the radar of other unions across Australia. And then I have to mention Labour Co, one of our member cooperatives, and Daniel and Gabe are here today, and they're looking very seriously at a SMART type new cooperative at the moment. So if you're interested or you want to connect with Labour Co, find Daniel and Gabe, who are here now, or come and see me and I'll connect you up. Yep, that's Perry. Yep.
Yeah, hi Sam. Hello all. Thanks for the engaging conversation. This is the second day here, and I just was thinking about from yesterday through today, like some thoughts that kept coming back, and like the first thing that came to my mind was actually when Ronnie was speaking, and it was about, she was talking about the amount of waste that had been diverted from landfill, and these sort of stats on how much good was being done, and then the sort of how much more there is to do, you know, and so, you know, this question of what gets measured gets managed came up. So I was thinking, like, what are the macro measures that really sort of start to indicate that there's a real shift happening at a larger level? And then, so yeah, so it's not, I don't really have this sort of well-formed question, but it was, you know, talking about this, how these platforms are tapping into this need, like they're facilitating social relationships, you know, so that's the bedrock is actually the relationships, and it's making it easy for people to do this. And then I was just thinking about, like, in relation to cooperatives, is there, like, the deeper perceptions of cooperatives in the collective psyche that go back generations, is it, you know, is it ideological? Is it like capitalism versus communism, you know, like these undercurrents? I just wanted to bring that up because I just feel like there are some deeper things that maybe need to be measured or looked at that, you know, right, yeah. So that was where I was coming from, yeah.
Jess, yep.
I think that's a really important question, because one of the challenges that we're going to have, I think, is actually working out how to measure the benefit of engaging in the local economy beyond the money that we spend, but how does it have a multiplier benefit within the local economy? Is it counting the number of people who are earning a living wage? Is it counting how many other suppliers are then engaged with as a sort of waterfall effect from the spend that we're able to redirect locally and into the democratic economy? I don't think we've quite nailed exactly what we're going to measure to make the case, because I think the challenge that we're facing at the moment is we're confronted by several generations who've never experienced secure work. People of my generation and younger who have never had a job that pays them benefits and as a bare minimum, let alone being engaged in an accountable and transparent democratic enterprise, democratically controlled enterprise. So it's sort of a leap of imagination for people to understand that business could be done differently or could be done better, or the economy could be organised in that way. So we have to work out what we measure so that we can demonstrate the benefit of doing business differently, and for government to be able to make the case that this is a way of spending money that has both an economic benefit as well as a social benefit. And I don't think we've quite nailed what to measure in order to make that case.
I might just hop in on the ideology issue. I think there is an ideological resistance, but I think it's not just ideology; it's also history. In my view, the natural thing would be for a lot of the enterprises that traditionally benefited from having a capitalist framework to, I guess, be minimised in favour of a growing, sharing and collaborative part or democratic part of the economy. But unfortunately, our institutions and the way that our sort of economies interact with the global economy and particularly with global finance makes it incredibly hard for us to do that in anything but a deliberate way. So I think step one is getting people to open their minds about what can be different, but also pointing out to people, I guess, that things have changed in the last 100 years, and that is a good enough reason for us to reassess the way we're doing things.
Yeah, I agree with Abigail in terms of ideology. I think too, cooperatives can be seen as a little old-fashioned. And I think we need to change that view as well. And whilst Abigail just said in the last 100 years, things have changed considerably. In the last 18 months, we've never seen greater change. And I think now is the time to promote cooperatives. I think there's a view throughout the community that that we are so dependent on international imports that people actually want to have more homegrown stuff. They want to be part of something that's here. They want to see their communities grow. They want to eat and their produce. They want to, make sure that their local communities are providing the services in the areas that they live. And I see that right across the state. So if ever there's a time, now's the time for cooperatives to really jump on board, in my view. In terms of measurement, sadly, we've moved to a measurement of economic benefit. Everything's got a dollar figure at the end, but the social benefit from what you guys do is extraordinary, and we do have to change the mindset there. We've all signed up, so we're happy to provide some assistance because ultimately it will be better for our community. We have to start to measure things differently.
If I can just add one more thing on the ideological side of things, we're also dealing with the fact that, whether it's, Adam Smith or Karl Marx, both of them came from a highly patriarchal view of the economy, and both of them viewed, at both ends of the spectrum, viewed anything that took place in the home as unproductive in terms of measuring what adds value to the economy. And so we have to also approach it from a feminist perspective, because actually the kinds of sectors that are, I think, most likely to grow, particularly in the cooperative and democratic economy, are care economy, contributors and service providers. And that's where there's a huge opportunity for growth, I think, for your sector. And yet it's not something that's considered, I think, to traditionally be part of the productive economy. It's seen as an expense rather than an investment in society.
Could I? I'm really sorry. I just want to butt in just one little tiny thing, just on the comment you made there, Jess, about the, whether it's Adam Smith or Karl Marx or whoever, they were all, that was a long, long time ago now as well. And we're not talking about a competition between those two ideas. We're talking about a brand new thing. So it's... No, I'm sorry, I'm agreeing with you and adding, not disagreeing. Yeah.
Godfrey, do you want to turn on this?
No, I think there's some very good answers there.
Just one comment. The Business Council of Cooperative Mutuals has an initiative about mutual value measurement, and it's certainly something to look at, an initiative that the cooperative sector is running on measuring things differently. But certainly also it's still difficult for us to get basic statistics about the cooperative sector as well. So it's something that government could assist us with. Okay, Rob.
Okay, this is directed to Godfrey. Just a comment. It's Rob McMaster from Blue Tongue Cooperative, but former member of the CMAC Metalworkers Cooperative in Western Sydney. So I'm very much on the same page as you. I see a lot of manufacturing closing, a lot of jobs being lost, and a lot of skills being lost in Australia. And I'm all for trying to reverse that, and I believe worker cooperatives are the way to do that. So now the union, you said you're very supportive of that concept, but not all the union is. But what I wanted to point out that back in the 1980s, there was a fantastic program introduced by the state government, and it was called the New South Wales Common Ownership Development Agency. And that was to support the transition of businesses to employee ownership. And there was a lot of companies transferred to employee ownership through succession, and it was quite successful. However, I think there were over 30 companies that succeeded in doing that. But the unions got involved in it quite heavily, and then the state government changed to Liberal, and they got very frightened that the unions were taking control of this, and the whole program got canned. And it was very unfortunate, because we'd be a lot more advanced today if that had gone ahead and happened. Now, we need something like that to be put in place today, and I think that would answer a lot of your problems around manufacturing businesses closing and how to transfer ownership successfully to employees. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I mean, I think the division within the union movement around the role of cooperatives, frankly, comes from two places, leaving out everyone in kind of my end of the spectrum who are super into cooperatives. One end is probably a little bit of uncertainty about, well, what is the role of a union in a cooperative? Maybe that's like a competitor thing to unions, which frankly, on either end of that angle, I would dispute and disagree with. The doctrine of the separation of powers is just as relevant economically as it is politically. You could elect a very poor manager and have no processes and be managed by a Trump for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and that could be problematic. Secondly, I think in the social base for a lot of unionists cut their teeth having quite testy relationships with a lot of farmer cooperatives. And there's no necessarily right or wrong in relation to that, but that coloured a lot of people's experiences and histories. Whereas my interaction with Murray Goulburn's and Golden Circles of the world was, as cooperatives were being corporatised, And while there are issues with the previous employer, because a lot of the workers on the shop floor were very removed from the full promise of what a cooperative could deliver, they were still much better employers than traditional corporations that came afterwards. And I very directly experienced that. I think what you've talked about there, Rob, is that there is a real element of power. Just because this ownership model is the best ownership model, frankly, that I can see, doesn't mean it's going to magically happen because it's necessarily more productive or more efficient or allows people to fully explore their human capacities. Because there's a whole set of institutional blocks, political power and influence that operates to stop those capacities and potentials from blooming, and we will need to remove them or find ways of doing it outside the space of the state until we have that power. And I think that there is probably room for a small-scale investment fund that a bunch of unions like United Workers Union and others tip into with a bunch of other larger cooperatives and mutuals in order to help with transitions of those enterprises or for enterprising people to start new cooperatives. And I think that that is probably a vastly underexplored area that should be looked at.
There's actually an organisation as well called the Working World that I wrote about in my book, which does do that process of transitioning. And primarily they've been working in Latin America, and now they've moved into North America, and they're helping in that process. But I think it's fascinating that we had that here in the 1980s. That's brilliant. I wish we could have that again.
We're running out of time, so there's three of you at least that I can see. Both Keela and Frank have asked a question yesterday, Gabe, you're up for, but Keela and Gabe, maybe you could fight it out. I know you've been there for a while, Frank, but we'll have to take it offline because we've got to get to the next session. What? Go, Keela, quickly. Just short questions and short answers.
My issue, I've been really concerned about waste for 30 years, and now we're looking at 5 incinerators to energy in the western suburbs. They're all on the cards, and we have to get really serious about getting waste out of the stream. We need zero waste legislation. But my vision for zero waste is that industries have to take responsibility for non-compostable waste at the end of the line. That way you would get a build-up of services in repair, reuse, refilling. I was part of the group that tried to stop losing the refillable milk bottles. And just as an example, the milk truck comes in, you employ people to sterilise the milk bottles, fill the milk bottles, deliver the milk bottles, pick up the milk bottles. The same with electronics. And I see cooperatives, I'm wondering what you think about this as a zero waste solution, cooperatives working together to build relocalised industries, and you will be able to employ many more people locally in all kinds of businesses and services to do with repair, reuse, upgrading, closed-loop recycling. Thank you.
Keela, I'm going to take that as a comment. Gabe, you've got a quick question for us?
Yeah, hello, my name's Gabe. I'm from Labour Cooperative, but I'm part of the launch of what will be Australia's representation of freelancers and creative initiative cooperatives. My background as a freelance creative my entire career to date, being fundamentally employed contractually to deliver creative services for the creative industries, be that through television productions, cinematography, media, music, entertainment, graphic design, etc. I've seen a real gap in the representation of our industry within government and parliament. I think that heavily comes from a lack of understanding about what we do based on a lack of available data from what we're doing. So obviously everyone of people like me who's literally self-employed their life but have worked in the forefront in a lot of the things that you would consume in your lives. We are all effectively managing that business themselves, that sole trading business. And of course, usually and fundamentally, those creatives aren't heavily business acumen back end anyway. So you'll find data on paying taxes, data on superannuation contributions, the stuff that the government can actually obtain to figure out what we're doing and when we're doing it and how frequently we're doing it, I think is what has been missed in our cultural and creative sector. I think a big part about changing that is going to be trying to transition more of these creative and cultural freelance workers across into, the background of what a labour code model is that we labour hire, service out workers and we place them and put them around. I understand, like, in a way, the union move it. You've got the MEWA, I think, in the creative sector, but I've been in that creative sector for 20 years and that never crossed my platform. So I think unions is a lot about like secured work and secured placement, but in my industry and my practice, work is never secure. And in our generational change, and mostly anyone at my age and younger will most likely have 2 to 3 to 4 different types of jobs in their life to survive in the current climate of the world we live in today. We're sort of taught to be entrepreneurial in our next generational mindset. We aren't go and become a metal worker, go and become a plumber, and you will do that forever. It is take out multiple ABNs, be creative in your application to diversify your portfolio to remain relevant and employable as you go through your life. It is the tracking of that data, I think, is what is currently missed in government, and through this freelancers effectively creative industries cooperative, which we're seeing is effectively delivered in Europe, in the UK and elsewhere, the need for that to be launched throughout Australia to unite the voices of those creative and cultural service work deliverables, try and pool some of that data on when we're doing things, how frequently we're doing things, and presenting that data to government in exchange for some kind of support system to, effectively the one shared problem I see early on is the superannuation that both government and freelance workers face, where freelance workers are not contributing to their own superannuation and the government knows this will be an issue in 30 years from now. So if we can move more of the workers of like me into a labour hire supported with back-end services, we can then provide data to government in real time about hours worked, frequency of hours, duration of payments, what are the terms and how it's delivered, to be able to then hopefully, if the government sees value in that exchange, maybe they will incentivise some superannuation contributions to obtain that data, to better understand that industry, to then be able to better map and to better transfer funds to be able to maintain that sector. I don't think anything was more apparent of that lacking in our climate when COVID hit, and the best the creative industry sector could do was an open letter to government with a whole bunch of supporting network groups, but there was no real peak body in that group. It was, here's a bunch of people, here is a bunch of groups, we have a shared problem, but there was no united voice there other than here is a letter and a problem, not really a solution. And that, I think, is where this creative industries cooperative is very much needed in our country and in our place, and never more relevant than right now. So I was going to try and approach you all after individually, but this is what I'm doing, this is who I am. So if you see any collaborative relevance, I'd love to catch up with you afterwards.
I might just respond if that's okay, because I do have to go. I have to be back in Belmont by 1 p.m. But Gabe, can I just say one thing to you? Smart. That's what we need. That's exactly the model that would address those issues that that you said. So I think it's important that we have some more conversations around that particular platform and bringing that here. So thank you.
No, we've got to finish now. Godfrey, you'd love to have a right of reply too, but you're not going to get it. Thank you very much for this session. Fantastic, fascinating session, I think. We're back here in 11 to talk about housing and community ownership. So you've only got 15 minutes. But 30 minutes, says the boss. Okay, we've got a bit more time to have a break, but we're definitely finishing now. Please just thank our speakers for their contribution. See you at 11:15. Well, okay.
I've got to go. You too, Jess. Hello. Hi. Sorry, we had. I don't know if it's. I don't think so. Oh, I can just be the standard now.
If you're happy, we're happy.
What do you know about cooperative housing? Around the world, co-ops are a big deal, well established, highly effective and successful. In some parts of the globe, cooperative housing is as varied as the people who live in it. Units, freestanding houses, villages, owners, part owners, renters, shared spaces, rooftop gardens, innovative designs. Australia's housing market no longer meets the needs for so many. People on low incomes, people with good incomes. What do
It's working. Thanks, Nabi. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session of today. Hello. So, a little closer? Yeah, great. So hello, my name is Molly Kendall. I am the Communications and Business Development Officer for the Cooperative Federation. So this might be the first time you're seeing me in person. You might have seen my face on the website, so I'm so happy and chuffed to be here in such a beautiful room of cooperators.
Well, we're happy to have you.
Oh, thank you. Everyone's been super welcoming. I'm actually from Tasmania. So when I acknowledge that we're standing on Aboriginal land, I should also acknowledge the Indigenous people of Hobart, which is the Palawa people. It's the Muanina people on Palawa country there in Hobart, where I am. And testament to the fact that I'm able to work remotely, so huge thanks. I guess that's a positive outcome from COVID for me, is I get to work in cooperatives, which is my happy place. A little bit of background on myself before I move on to the panel theme. So my interest in cooperatives was mostly around housing cooperatives. I toured around Australia and did my honours thesis in housing cooperatives. So yeah, Gretchen very much in my interest sphere. And also Louise, sorry. And then I moved to Hobart, fell in love with Hobart and started working at Resource Work Cooperative, which is a waste recycling cooperative. It's been going since the 90s. It's got 33 workers, so a worker-owned cooperative. So I've had 7 years' experience in that, on the ground, sorting through rubbish, but absolutely loving the family that I built there in my workers' cooperative. So yeah, that's a bit about me. Our theme for this session is housing and community ownership. So we've got a little bit about cooperative housing and a little bit about joint community ownership of facilities and services and infrastructure. So we have Greg Ryan. He is from Bundagen, and I should just say that it's misspelt up there as Bundanoon. So apologies about that. It is actually Bundagen. It's one of the... Bundagen. Oh man, I pronounced it wrong. It's one of the peak pinnacle housing co-ops. It's one of those co-ops that everyone, when I was travelling around, said, you've got to go visit Bundagen. So fantastic co-op. We've got Gretchen Out Cooper. Gretchen was one of the founders of the Goulburn Community Energy Co-op. And we've got Associate Professor Louise Crabtree from Western University, and we have Carmen Osborne, who is the Chair of Common Equity New South Wales. We have Courtney Houssos. So thank you everyone for coming, and I guess I'll first welcome Greg Ryan to speak. A little bit about Greg's background. He was 20 years in the Navy, and then he moved into land sharing cooperatives. So he was one of the founding members of Bundagen, but he's also been involved in the formation of 2 other land sharing cooperatives. So a bastion of land sharing co-ops in Australia. Welcoming Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Molly, and thank you, Sam, for inviting me here today. It's the first time I've talked to this type of assembly. It's usually a bunch of rowdy people who want to buy some land. Rural land sharing communities are particularly organised around the bottom line of housing, basic housing, is right out in the left field. It represents the fringe of cooperative organisations. It becomes an area where people get together, make up it's like the Wild West, where people come together to settle on some land, and they make up their own rules as they go along, and occasionally look at the co-op rules while they're doing it. My expertise is 40 years of living at Bundagen, which I stumbled over in the 80s, The one who can have the map up there, thank you. It is it's on the coast, just south of Coffs Harbour. It's 400 hectares with 1.5 kilometres of beachfront and surrounded by a national park. So it was the ideal isolated. And the people that moved there to buy it in the early days were academics that wanted to save the land, but it eventually became a housing cooperative, and it progressed from there. The way it's structured is it's a success as far as the cooperative model goes, because everything is run from within. It's a holistic type of lifestyle where we've got our own private cemetery, and it funds itself. We work on the principle of social harmony, environmental responsibility, and economic interdependence. Basically, the product is the people, and everyone pays in $30 a week to the community, and that brings in a total of about $250,000 a year, which pays for the tractor, the roads, the administration and stuff like that. Individuals who work for the community get a low pay of $15 an hour, which is deducted from their levies. So, it's very successful money-wise. We've got a lot of money for parties and social functions, and so it works well. And I also, 20 years ago, I started up another community at Crescent Heads, which is just north of Port Macquarie, called Barangi, and that didn't really take off because of difficult access to the land. So I looked for some more land nearby, another 1,600-acre block, and then formed Goolawah Co-op with, under the legislation at the time, the State Environment Planning Policy 15, you could get up to a maximum of 80 houses on a block of land. And that's been very successful. I got a share in that, in a little house there too. But what's happened in the intervening times, the cooperative model was perfect for running this type of enterprise, right? Which is a non-trading. We avoided the horrendous land tax and avoided income tax too as a cooperative, but always paid the GST on inputs. So the model for settling the land was, the SEP 15 was repealed by the state government, and only 2 other councils in the New South Wales area took up the model of allowing multiple occupancy, basically. That is Shoalhaven Shire and Clarence Valley Shire. This is where councils are friendly to lots of settlers on rural land. Right. Yes, and so back in the 80s, it was usually academics who were looking, as I said, to protect land, and then in the 2000s, it was people, older people who saw the advantage of a community cooperative type lifestyle, and Goolawah was slow to fill up in the 2000s, but recently, at the present day, there's just the two communities are besieged by people who want to move out of the city, young families who are actually looking for community, who don't want to live a suburban, isolated life. And there's a crying need for this type of setup to do it. So from what I see, the future for this is it takes that 1 or 2 courageous, selfless individuals to go out and look for land that's for sale in obviously in these 2 shires, and then advertise, and then start having meetings regularly to attract new settlers to the land, and then quickly form the co-op, so you can open up a bank account, and then you can start taking money in to buy the land. All right, so that is a kind of time conscious period where you're hoping you're not getting gazumped by the other land buyers. So, but once you've secured the land with some excess capital, you can hand it over to the bunch who make up their own rules, and you lose control of it. But and usually once the tragedy of the whole exercise, once it's successful, people who live on these rural land sharing communities are inward looking. They don't, once they've got their own house site, haven't got any incentive to promote it for anyone else, unless you can prick their consciousness about supporting other ones. The co-op I'm in now in Bundadjung, we have helped finance the other cooperatives in a mortgage, and then also assisted by opening up bank accounts. So yes, it's all about people management inside it, and the cooperative model is extremely successful because you haven't got a bunch of the directors taking over control, because they're obviously re-elected every 12 months. The meetings, as far as the meetings, the members basically want to take control of decision making, and the directors are relegated to an oversight. That is the model that works. If the directors jump in, hell breaks loose, and one of the communities is doing that at the moment, and it's in chaos, you know. And what underpins this type of setup, stability, is a good administration that's accurate with the minutes and allows members to put in proposals. And these are just some of the slides of Bundadjung. I didn't take any pictures of the beach. You probably know what a beach looks like. And anyway, thanks for hearing me.
Thanks so much, Greg. And I did see a picture of the beach last night when we were at dinner flicking through, and it's beautiful. So absolutely amazing that you've been able to secure that gorgeous bit of land and manage it together in a community for so long. So congrats. So welcoming to the handheld mic, which we've got right there, is Gretchen Out-Cooper from Goldberg Community Energy Co-op. So Gretchen is a qualified accountant with 40 years tax experience, mostly in financial services and self-managed super. Her knowledge spans several different areas, but interestingly, she's a founder of an accounting software startup, and she's currently been a part of forming the Goulburn Energy Community Cooperative, which is what we're going to hear about today. So thanks so much, Gretchen.
Thanks, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. Our story for the cooperative started, as many do, with a group of people getting together around a kitchen table. They'd all just attended a sustainability conference in Goulburn, and they said, let's build a community-owned solar farm. So that was in 2014, and many of the people at that initial, well, all of the people at that initial meeting were also members of the Goulburn Group, which went out and got a grant from the Department of Environment and Heritage to allow a feasibility study to be done on whether it was possible to build a community-owned solar farm. So that was back in 2014. 2015 they got the grant. 2016 they did the feasibility study, got a development application, got conditional approval from Essential Energy to tap into the grid, to feed into the grid. And they started up the governance structures that they thought were necessary. So they set up an incorporated association, which still is going, called CE4G, and a public unlisted company. And they soon found the difficulties with having a public unlisted company. Namely, one of the founders of that company bought shares for himself, his wife, his son, his daughter, his company, and they tried to railroad the whole thing and take the company over. In 2017, he picked up his bat and ball and went home because he wasn't getting his own way. And I was invited to come on board as treasurer. About the same time, we started investigating cooperatives. Someone came and talked to us about them, and we investigated further and decided, yes, this is the democratic model that we want. This is how the community can really own this solar farm. We decided to be very clever and create a prospectus, very similar to the one used by Hepburn Wind. Failed dismally. Department of Fair Trading tossed it out straight away. I mean, this was a magnificent 47-page document. How could they not see what a wonderful thing it was? Someone very kindly introduced us to SAM and the Cooperative Federation. And Sam showed us that we really didn't need the 47-page prospectus with the glossy pictures, that we really needed a disclosure statement that was according to what Department of Fair Trading wanted, and rules. Took us a couple of attempts, and then Sam shepherded us through the process. So let me just refer back to my timeline for a moment. In 2019, this was a pivotal year. We signed an agreement with Como Energy, who are going to build it for us. They build small to mid-scale projects like ours, where ours is going to be 1.8 megawatt, 4,000 panels. It'll power about 500 houses. We started on the co-op establishment. In November of 2019, after an enormous amount of work, the Department of Primary Industry and Environment awarded us a $2.1 million grant to put a battery on the solar farm. But it was conditional on us having the co-op set up and conditional on us raising the rest of the money, 1.96 million, that was necessary to build the farm. So in 2020, in the year of COVID, our co-op was set up by July, and we had to then raise, we had 6 months in which to raise the rest of the money. So we got into it. We ran market stalls. We'd always had kept people informed through CE4G, but we really ramped it up. We ran market stalls. We ran email campaigns. We sent press releases to every imaginable publication, especially those in the renewable energy sector. We created some videos. Dr. John Hewson was very helpful in that and came on board and did a video for us about the importance of small-scale projects like this. We did local letterbox drops. We did radio interviews. We had a public launch meeting. We were scheduled to have the public launch meeting, and the COVID restrictions were still in place. And they said you can only have 150 in the auditorium. 3 days before the project, before the launch, the restrictions were lifted, and we were able to have 300 people in the auditorium, and every single one of those seats was filled. We had a second public meeting a week later. We conducted a webinar, and that was interesting. None of us had any experience with webinars and Zoom meetings and things like that. We soon learned. We had our first extraordinary general meeting in April of this year, at which we elected directors from the renewable energy sector who are non-executive members, non-executive directors. The most important thing is that as we sit here today, we have $1.86 million in the bank. We have a pledge from Como to fund the shortfall. We have 236 committed investors. When we said at our EGM that we had a shortfall, by the end of the meeting we had pledges for 75% of the shortfall. The community sense and the community power that's behind this project is just phenomenal. So we've harnessed the power of the community to bring power to the community.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful line as well. I hope you use that in all of your comms and social media marketing. Yeah, harnessing the power of the people to bring power to the people. Amazing. So thank you so much for that story, and it's making me reminisce about my first ever Zoom, which, how about, can everyone cast their minds back to their first ever Zoom, when this word Zoom was just an unknown thing, strange Skype thing that was new. I remember at Resource we had our first general meeting when we just shut down the shop because of COVID, and yeah, everyone dialing in and us doing a little test run, and I'm super anxious there waiting for my little 30, member worker owners to call in, and some of them had, couldn't use their phone. A lot of them are sort of semi-literate, and it was such an amazing moment of being able to connect in those times where you thought you'd lost that connection. So, and look at us now, we're Zoom pros. We're streaming live. So, going straight on down the line to the lovely Louise Crabtree. So Louise Crabtree Hayes is a Principal Research Fellow in the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University. Her work focuses on enabling regenerative futures, including work on the roles of community-led housing models such as housing cooperatives and community land trusts in addressing social, environmental and economic justice. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. It's really awesome to see everyone here. So if I could get my slides up. Oh, and I'll come in closer. Okay, yep. Excellent, thank you. So very quickly what I'm going to do is just talk about, well, sort of based on the work that my team's been doing, looking at housing co-ops both internationally and here, and some of the benefits and challenges that have been sort of identified in that literature, but also then talking about what the possible future here could be based on that international experience. So internationally, what we saw in the review of the literature that we did across the USA and Europe was phenomenal scale, a difference in scale and scope of co-op sectors, ranging from absolutely minute parts of the housing system, typically less than 1%, through to over 20% of some housing systems, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, where they're really well-established and substantial parts of the housing system and just seen as part of that housing system. Individual co-ops in themselves also range in scale from a few households through to the biggest, which is actually more than 15,000 housing units. Not surprisingly, it's a development called Co-op City in New York, which is masses of housing towers, but childcare centres, schools, shops. It's actually an extraordinary development. We see co-ops offering everything from really affordable rentals through to market rate home ownership opportunities. So the sort of catch cry of the co-ops internationally is that John Lennon was living in one when he unfortunately met his untimely end. So and so everything from really affordable through to extremely top-end real estate on Manhattan Island, and everything in between. So range of price points, range of tenure options in that spectrum. So what we did see, though, was a slight sort of, I guess, difference in the sectors. So the Canadian, UK and USA sectors were very much dominated by affordable rental cooperatives, although the USA is a bit of a mix. In the Scandinavian sectors, they're more sort of a sub-market ownership products. They're not quite affordable, but they're not full rate market either. So they're sort of sitting somewhere in between, sort of seen as an entry-level product for middle-class housing. And a lot of people now actually putting their children on wait lists for co-ops at birth. So there's this incredible sort of oversubscription to the model, but that also that intergenerationality, because they've been established for sort of 100 years, a lot of those sectors. So increasingly, some are including the non-housing activities. So as I mentioned, things like childcare centres, but also community centres and workspaces, and even things like hotels and commercial centres. And so increasingly, in this sort of, I guess, resurgence in some of the European cities, we're seeing co-ops becoming quite savvy and cross-subsidising themselves by doing commercial and housing activities. And we're seeing cities actually recognising that role and increasingly wanting to divert land or subsidies into the co-op sector because they see these multiple benefits and activities that the co-ops are providing. So we're very much seeing an increasing municipal interest in non-market housing, and that includes in New York as well and in London. So we've seen quite substantial policy innovations where the cities have said, we've actually got to stop letting land go out to market. We've actually got to start putting it into these entities that can steward this in perpetuity and keep it affordable and have these multiple outcomes and programs happening across the community. And part of that is because of the relevance of and to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this was discussed yesterday as well. And cities are increasingly, through that language, able to sort of understand what the co-ops do. So the co-ops have been quite sort of savvy in using the language of the SDGs in their communication with the cities and other stakeholders to actually argue for their relevance to the challenges that we're facing at the moment. So what we did see, despite this incredible diversity, we did see some commonality across that, and this is also based on the ICA review in 2012 at the start of the cooperative decade when they did a big review of housing co-ops. So we did see some commonality in terms of this increasing diversification. So we're seeing increasing intermediate tenure forms, so things that aren't quite ownership and aren't quite rental and are sitting in between in sort of the limited equity space. So people put a bit of money in, but it's not market rate. They get a bit of return, but they don't get to speculate. So it's sort of sitting right in the middle there. We're also seeing increasing diversification within each co-op. So ones that historically have done ownership starting to also offer rentals and vice versa, just in recognition of the gaps in their housing market and expanding in response to those gaps and that demand. Increasingly, we're seeing a lot of focus on ageing in place and seniors housing. So I think this is the boomers finding their voice and realising that co-ops have got some things to offer as they age. And very much because of that sense of community and wanting that sense of community, but that brings with it capacity issues, and some sectors are flagging that yes, we do want to be housing older populations, but we've got to have in place the supports to enable self-governance as people age and to not be burdening people as they may be dealing with complex challenges. And as part of that, we're seeing the sort of increase of co-housing as a model that the co-ops are providing, which is smaller individual units supplemented by greater shared amenities. So the other sort of area of convergence that we're seeing is co-ops spreading out of cities into regional areas, and particularly, as we heard yesterday, things like communities deciding they've got to buy their shop because the supermarket's withdrawing. We're also seeing this happening in the housing space with communities in regional centres wanting to actually stabilise their housing market, and particularly in the face of things like tree change and now COVID change. So we're seeing a lot of capacity building programs, training and co-design for complex needs. So again, the sector's kind of maturing and diversifying in what it's doing, and seeing a lot of focus around how the co-ops are treated under tax, how they source capital and land. This is absolutely a ubiquitous issue for the sector, how to actually just get started and how to get a foothold in incredibly overheated markets, and how to actually reduce construction costs without reducing quality. And as part of that, we're also seeing an increasing focus on environmental outcomes, so wanting to go solar passive, solar active, do water sourcing and treatment on site, and sort of really drilling down deep on the sustainability of the stock so that people have better quality homes, but also reduced utility bills in their housing. So the benefits that we saw, there are data issues in this literature, but What has been reported is obviously increased social capital, so senses of neighbourhood, friendship networks, all of those sorts of outcomes. Increased housing stability and quality, but quite often there isn't a baseline against which it's being compared, so it's kind of hard to know what has generated that and what you're comparing it to. Some reporting, self-reporting of health and wellbeing outcomes, but again, no longitudinal data to actually show whether people's health and wellbeing is improving. A lot of talk about skills acquisition, obviously through the self-governance. A study in Canada did show lower operating costs for co-ops compared to other forms of social housing, but it didn't control for location or the age of the stock. So again, there's some problems with that data. And there are reporting around broader social, economic or development outcomes, so where a co-op is providing something like childcare for the broader community or creating a community garden, those sorts of things. The two main challenges, the first one was insularity or exclusivity, whether that was perceived or real. So a perception that the co-op sort of, and this was alluded to before, the co-op kind of ending at the doors of the building and not engaging with the broader community, whether that's a perception or real. It was very much documented in the literature. The second one, which was absolutely ubiquitous, was burnout. So people just over time getting exhausted, particularly if they're a small co-op and particularly if there isn't much turnover in terms of directors and people having to deal with the multiple complexities of trying to get a co-op up and running and keep it up and running. So turning around to the fun part and how we grow the sector based on that, what we found is every single sector has needed input to get going. No sector has managed to bootstrap itself into existence out of nothing. So whether it's public land, public subsidies, a labour union, an affiliated sector. There's always been something helping, whether it's in terms of favourable lending, land donations, grant schemes. So there's always, which sort of is also part of the cooperative ethos. So with particularly the Scandinavian sectors, they emerged from massive labour union movements who then realised, well, we actually have to house workers. And so there was that sort of complementarity between the models. So as I said, that can be a range of different supports to get the sector going. Second, so building on this, we found this really interesting literature talking about how the ideal relationship to the state, because this varied immensely across the sectors that we looked at. So one is what's called over-embeddedness, where it's part of the state housing system, but the state is overly controlling and constraining. So enables the sector, but then doesn't actually allow it to do anything and doesn't allow it to do what it does best. So it's just too sort of controlling. Second is called disembeddedness, where the state provides no support, which can free the sector up, but may not actually enable it and may not provide it with the resources that it needs to get going. So not surprisingly, there's this sort of Goldilocks zone called embedded autonomy, where the state supports the sector, but actually allows it to define itself and work out how it does best. What it does best. So I think it's an interesting kind of hypothetical sweet spot to possibly be thinking about as we think about the Australian co-op sector and how we might go forward. So this was our sort of, I guess, extension or thoughts about the blueprint for a co-op decade that was released in 2013. And so they sort of propose 5 elements that we need if we're going to have a co-op decade, which we're probably getting towards the end of, so we need to move quickly. But thinking about that in the Australian co-op, the first one they talked about was participation. And what we saw in the literature is that indicative levels of participation are actually high, but there is an issue around succession, how we draw on the knowledge of the sector now to actually build a sector and start to diversify the sector into a sort of greater range of models. Because the Australian sector has, as you'll hear, the rental co-ops, but also things like Bundadjin, which are the ownership co-ops. And with the exception of one co-op in Fremantle, none have actually brought those two models together. So we've got this sort of bifurcated sector and nothing in the middle of that. So very much thinking about, well, how do we get it to scale? How do we get it across that sort of tenure divide? So the second point of the blueprint was sustainability. So, and I think with this we need to be thinking about a housing ecosystem and how we actually have all of those affiliated industries. So if we think about who's in the room for this assembly, we've got some notable absences in terms of all of those things that come along with housing around finance, construction, architecture, developers. So how we actually get all of these affiliated industries that are aligned to the cooperative sector and cooperative ethos so we can actually start to diversify it. So the question of identity, there is a strong international sector, and I think we should be using that to advocate for the sector here and showing the successes overseas and the extraordinary outcomes in terms of building quality. And we've obviously got a strong co-op and mutual sector, and we need to actually build awareness of this in the public psyche as something other than the dominant models, because as we've seen, they're always oversubscribed, whether it's Bundagen or things like Nightingale or the Assemble model, they're always oversubscribed. So there's obviously massive interest out there and people trying to find out what these are. So our fourth element was the legal frameworks, and this has come up yesterday already. The framework might not be fit for purpose at the moment, so we really need to look at how we actually can enable the sector through having appropriate regulation and having an appropriate framework in place to enable particularly the provision of things like limited equity products. And the big one, capital. How do we raise capital? How do we get land? How do we actually do this in an appropriate way that doesn't overburden the residents then in terms of land cost? So this is my last slide. This was so what might a sector look like here if we were going to go there? So I think there's a lot to be learned from the multi-tiered sector in the Scandinavian companies. We've got individual co-ops providing their housing. They form regional umbrella organisations, and those regionals actually comprise their national organisations. So you've got this sort of reverse nested hierarchy where each tier owns the tier above it. And provides services to the tier below it. And I think that's actually been a really strong model that we could have a think about. Crucially, in a lot of those sectors, the co-ops actually hold titles, so they're a lot more empowered, say, than our rental co-ops here, and it does give more flexibility to the sector to have that title. Theoretically, we could have individual co-ops that are hundreds of units in size that are individually providing a mix of price points, so that individual co-ops could be doing everything from rental through to market rate ownership and cross-subsidising themselves within their own portfolio. So we could really be thinking next sort of level in terms of the scale of our co-ops here, because individually they're all still quite small. Or you could have individual co-ops. You can sort of build it however you want, sort of one big co-op doing lots of things or lots of little co-ops doing different things. There's a number of different ways we could go. But either way, the sector could span the tenure divide and actually really speak to this gap that we've got between rental and ownership models and provide a greater diversity of options. And then lastly, we need these affiliated and allied co-op sectors. So, we heard a lot yesterday around the plumbers co-ops, but we need developers, we need architects, we need builders, we need lenders, we need this whole ecosystem to be operating in this space and providing the alternatives. So we can actually grow and normalise a viable alternative and industry to what's currently on offer through the market. So that's where I will wrap up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Louise. That was fantastic, and it's really got me thinking about the way we develop the sector in Australia and what enabling tools we can give people to start envisioning what cooperative living looks like, and the amazing examples from overseas that give people a sense of security that this is a viable, thriving way to live. So, next up I will welcome Carmen Osborne. So Carmen has been Technical Director for the Board of Common Equity in New South Wales from November 2013. She's been Chairperson since 2015. How many common equity people do we still have in the audience today? Wow, we've got a good chunk. I'm so glad you're still here. So for those who don't know, Common Equity New South Wales is a registered community housing provider established to manage social housing cooperatives and coordinating the provision of community development and property management for 32 houses in New South Wales. They've recently co-designed cooperative housing projects in Croydon and Cabramatta. So Carmen is passionate about the diverse needs of social wellbeing and housing cooperative tenants throughout New South Wales, and she would like to see cooperative housing become a mainstream thing. So welcoming Carmen.
Just one correction there. There's 32 co-ops and 500 dwellings. So a bit bigger scale. We're going to start with a short video just to explain.
What do you know about cooperative housing? Around the world, co-ops are a big deal, well established, highly effective and successful. In some parts of the globe, cooperative housing is as much as 40% of the total housing in a city. In Australia, people are embracing co-ops, with over 8,000 living in housing cooperatives across the country, and that's on the rise. There's so much to like about cooperative housing. Residents love it, frequently rating it better than any other form of housing. It's a model that empowers, generating significant social, financial, health and well-being benefits. It's inclusive for all ages and demographics and offers the benefits of safety and security with the joy of being part of a vibrant local community. Cooperative housing is as varied as the people who live in it. Units, freestanding houses, villages, owners, part owners, renters, shared spaces, rooftop gardens, innovative designs. Australia's housing market no longer meets the needs for so many. People on low incomes, people with good incomes, retirees, older Australians, vulnerable groups, people with a disability or those just wanting to be part of a stronger community. We need a better way. The solution is cooperative housing. Housing cooperatives are intentional and vibrant communities, like-minded people actively working together, selecting new members, making local decisions, maintaining properties, learning new skills, and contributing to their community. They are legal entities that operate to protect the rights and interests of all members. They run according to 7 principles: voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education, training and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for the community. Common Equity is the peak body for cooperative housing in New South Wales. We support existing housing co-ops and help develop new ones. We innovate, we demonstrate how to reduce the cost of housing and support services, we build communities, we build resilience, we create new ways to access affordable housing. Choice, control, cooperation. Together, let's explore the opportunities. www.commonequity.com.au. The future is cooperative.
Thank you. So I'm glad to share with those of you who aren't cooperative members what it could be like. So we're based on social housing. Common Equity is a community housing provider. We take the head lease of properties. We have an agreement with each of the co-ops, and the co-ops manage the tenants. So it's a little bit like that multi-tiered arrangement that Louise was talking about a few minutes ago. As you can see from the video, and we had a session yesterday, our co-ops are self-managed, autonomous. They have the ability to make decisions. And especially, I think, one of the things that we've been talking about is participation, the ability to choose who joins the co-op and have their participation in managing the properties, the rentals, the maintenance and tenant activities. So it's very much a self-managed autonomous group, and that's really important for the success of the cooperative sector. So I guess the things that we're here to speak about today is that we've been, I guess, I use the word hamstrung by the fact that we've been really very much over-embedded in government in terms of the fact that most of our properties are owned by Land and Housing Corporation. We do not have title, despite several approaches to government for that. And so our ability to grow the sector really depends on us using the cash flow from our bottom line. And then we've just starting a process now where individual co-ops are able to help Common Equity invest in the growth of the sector. So that's how we've funded the next project we're about to start, which is the co-design of Cabramatta with the Vietnamese community, which will have a combination of 13 seniors dwellings and 8 affordable housing dwellings. So we'd love to do more, but we're really needing finance for that project. That will be our first project that is funded from a loan from the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, and like I think many of you may have found during dealing with levels of bureaucracy, the hoops we need to jump to get that money almost make it feel like it's not worth it. But Bank Australia are our backup plan for NIFIC. But the importance we see is the ability to give long-term secure rental. The more of the portfolio that we can own, the more we can leverage to grow. So we're really trying to look for how we can get the opportunities to grow the sector. I think it's also important that we're allowed our co-ops, once people come in, have secure accommodation, they can get training, their education, they can get a job, they can stay. So as the co-ops grow and develop, the people can grow and develop in that space and have that security. They don't get kicked out when they get a job, they just pay more rent. So it becomes a mix of people within the co-op over time, which I think is an important characteristic of our co-ops. I think it's really important for us. Last night was fantastic hearing about all the different types of co-ops that we have. We're really keen to partner. There's lots of organisations that have land that might not be well used. We're quite happy to partner with people on long-term leases or other arrangements to build and manage cooperatives. We're really keen to do more in regional areas. We have some regional co-ops, mainly the North Coast, but also at Albury and around the Illawarra. And we know, we think housing affordability is terrible everywhere, but the regions have really suffered, I will use that word, from the COVID flight of capital and people from the cities to the regional areas, squeezing people out of the affordable market, and rental accommodation is, I think, getting very difficult to obtain. So we're really keen to work with co-ops who might have land or space that they're happy to work with us on, because we think we can add value to those local regional communities. As Louise mentioned there, at the moment, our constitution and the way that we're set up allows us to do social housing and affordable housing, but we're really keen to explore the concepts of mixed equity. And for example, one of the projects where we want to work on is with the Older Women's Network, in terms of people who might be retiring with a little bit of a nest egg in terms of super or something like that. They want to live communally, and we believe there's a lot of advantages. Particularly, we've got a lot of older tenants in our co-ops who support each other, particularly during COVID, buddy systems to check on each other. It's just the social isolation and vulnerability of people when you've got neighbours who actually care about you and check on you, and they feel that's because you belong to a group. We find that has been really important during COVID, and people have reported that back to us. And Louise didn't mention it, but we've been part of that international research, and the next stage of that research is actually going to be interviewing our co-ops and serving our co-ops. And what we really want to get is a really strong evidence base. So we have the anecdotal, works well, but we need the evidence base in terms of is there better well-being? How do you measure that? Is it less sickness? Is it people's self-reported feelings of well-being? How do we measure that? So we really want to get an evidence base that measures the soft side. I think we've talked a little bit about the costs, by managing yourself and keeping on top of maintenance, not letting you get out of hand. Those sort of things have a cost benefit, but there's also the social benefits, which also have an economic benefit, because people aren't getting as sick. They're feeling better, they're able to contribute, they might be able to grow their own food or participate in a community garden. So they're getting fresh food, and they're getting that social contact as well. So we want to try and quantify the benefits. One of our other goals is to try and get into that social impact investment space. So in order to do that, we need to prove what our value is. It's not just the physical home, but it's all the benefits that go with living in our type of management system away from private rental or the larger CHPs. So how do we do it, I guess? So the small projects that we've done to date have really been about doing an uplift in terms of dwellings on the site. So Croydon was one home occupied by an older person who moved to a nursing home. We retrofitted that, into 6 dwellings, 2 of them purpose designed for people with disabilities, each with their own private bathroom and kitchenette, combined laundry, a large communal space and kitchen, and a nice area at the back where people can meet and convert the garage to a meeting space. So we've gone from one person living in that lot to there's 6 tenancies, but one of them is a family group of 3. So, just getting that change. Cabramatta is 3 homes, which will hopefully get 21 dwellings. So there's sort of incremental change. It's not high-rise apartments, but we're able to better utilise that sort of land. And that if we had title, is a shadow minister here, if we had title, we'd also be able to manage our properties more effectively and retrofit the sites to get more dwellings or dwellings that fit for purpose. A lot of our discussion yesterday was we have a lot of older tenants whose properties don't meet their needs, particularly in terms of access and safety in showers and bathrooms, and the ability to be able to retrofit those properties to suit their needs in the long term so they can age in place in the co-op is really important. I feel like I'm using too much time. So anyway, we're very keen to explore a number of models, including a mix of tenants in terms of perhaps having people paying market rent as well as affordable housing rentals, social rentals, and I apologise if I'm using terminologies that may have specific meanings, but it's really a lot of our tenants are paying below market rent. They pay a proportion of what they earn and what they can afford to pay. And as I said, we would be keen to look at models where people might even bring equity to the table, so that would enable us to build more units, but also they could, the Nightingale people have done a lot of work on how you trade out of. So there'd be ability to trade out of the property if you chose to move on. And so there's some rules around that need to be worked on. I think that's also, from a legal point of view, some of the work that needs to be done with the Commonwealth Government. Summing up, I think there's a lot of benefits from the community housing management. In particular, we believe the community wellbeing, and we want to quantify that. And I guess we talked a little bit at morning tea. Some of the disadvantages are, as a co-op, you're living together 24/7. So you really need to be able to get on with people, and that's why tenant selection is so important, and managing people's participation so you don't get the burnout that Louise referred to. And as all of you in co-ops know, you need rules about what you can do, people to understand their obligations when they become a member, and you need that ability to get along. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Amazing to think about trying to map and make more tangible those outside benefits, those sort of soft benefits of living in a housing cooperative. So the growing local food and having, someone to look after the elderly, woman down the road. And I imagine some of them might match up on yesterday's theme with the UN SDGs and could maybe be mapped that way then. So sad, isn't it, how we have to prove these things with numbers and tangibly. So moving on to Courtney. So Courtney Houssos is the New South Wales Shadow Minister for Consumer Protection. I've read the wrong thing. She's actually the Shadow Minister for Better Regulation and Innovation since Friday, so sorry about that. New role. Yeah, so Courtney was elected to the Legislative Council in 2015. Prior to entering Parliament, she was an elected party official for the New South Wales branch of the Australian Labor Party, serving 9 years as the New South Wales country organiser, the first woman to do so. And welcome to the stage.
Well, thanks very much, Molly. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you to my fellow panellists, who you may have noticed I was taking copious amounts of notes while they were making their very interesting and very well researched presentations. And can I just say thank you for having me to all of the members here today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also the traditional owners of the lands on which everyone who's joining us online, I'm not sure where to look for the online component. In preparing for today, several people reminded me of the long history of cooperatives, and they talked about the first registered co-op of in Brisbane, the Brisbane Cooperative Society in 1859, and a time before Queensland was separated from New South Wales, or even further back, the 1829 English law that then formed the basis of our 1873 Act. But it really struck me that it's actually Aboriginal people who have been doing much of the philosophy and the principles of cooperatives for over 60,000 years. They've been working collectively for a common purpose. They've been pooling their resources and then returning those surpluses to the tribe. So I am really delighted to be here. And I wanted to congratulate the Cooperative Federation. I understand last year's event did have to be cancelled, like so much during COVID, but this year's expanded 2-day conference and the dinner, I'm very sorry I couldn't join you last night. I really think that it's encapsulating and taking advantage of some of those benefits, the things that we've learnt over the last 12 months as part of the pandemic. I am a very avid supporter of flexible work, so I understand the benefits of doing things online, but also having that face-to-face interaction that so many of us have missed over the last 12 months. As Molly pointed out, this is the end of my very first week as a Shadow Minister and as the Shadow Minister for Better Regulation and Innovation. So I think you might have been expecting to hear from my colleague Julia Finn, but she generously passed the opportunity to me. So I am very excited to be here. And I understand you've heard from one of my other Labor colleagues this morning, Yasmin Catley. And at the outset, I'd really like to pay tribute to another Labor colleague who spoke to you yesterday, Mick Veitch, who, as a previous Shadow Minister for cooperatives, is certainly a passionate supporter of them. And given that I'm at day 7, I think he's forgotten more about cooperatives than I know. I am very encouraged to have such a passionate supporter within the Shadow Cabinet who's going to help me advocate on behalf of cooperatives as we go forward. So to give you a little bit of context about me. So yes, that's right. I was elected in 2015. I live here in Sydney with my husband and my 7-year-old and my 4-year-old. But I grew up and I was born in Foster on the mid-north coast. And the irony being that I spent most of my childhood itching to get out of country New South Wales and then have spent most of my professional life working right across country New South Wales. So although I don't live there anymore, I have a deep love and respect for country New South Wales, and I know that that is a unique opportunity for cooperatives. It was actually when I was working for the Labor Party I had the opportunity to go to the UK in 2010 and work on their election campaign then, and I discovered one day as I was door knocking that I was actually campaigning alongside the Cooperative Party, and I didn't quite, anyway, he explained the long history and the collaboration between the British Labor Party and the Cooperative Party in the UK, and the fact that they've had a sister relationship since 1927 and that they duly endorse candidates as they were, the one that we were campaigning for. And for me, that really struck me. The ideals behind cooperatives strike me as being very similar to Labor ideals, being community run, being democratically run, the idea of collective action and focused on a greater good. Now, I accept that not everyone involved in a cooperative is a Labor supporter, but I do very much understand that strong sense of community that drives co-ops and obviously the people who work so passionately within them. Now, other speakers might have said this to you. Our New South Wales Labor platform supports co-ops, and we understand that they're not just that they are important to our economy and to our communities, and that they're operating across a broad range of industries. But we also importantly recognise that their value as a socially responsible form of business enterprise. And we've got a long history of supporting them. Mick reminded me that there was even a Minister for Cooperatives in the Rann Labor government. And I spoke earlier about the history of co-ops, and that's a long and rich history, but it strikes me that there's a bit of a timeless concept, because to be honest, they're as timeless as the communities that they work within. And in recent years, we've seen the emergence of co-ops where the market has failed, in banking, especially across country communities, in the farming sector, much more. And that's why I was so interested to hear this morning about, to be honest, two of those key challenges that we are confronting every government of every level, being housing and energy and climate change. And I think it's really been very informative for me, but I think it's also a sign of the times that cooperatives are actually adapting to address these significant public policy issues that we're facing. The opportunities, I think, for co-ops is because we're seeing people increasingly informed about how and where they spend their money, whether it's they're checking their supply chains for modern slavery or human trafficking, they're buying local produce to support local farmers, and especially in the emergence of ethical investment of their super. People want to use their money, they are literally voting with their feet about using their funds and their resources in a more effective way. But this is where co-ops share a similarity with another part of my portfolio in innovation, because we can all say we want more co-ops or more startups, but we know, and as Louise has told us this morning, the academic research actually shows us, this is where the government needs to step in. They have to provide that vital support to help a good idea when it's supported by committed individuals working hard to actually flourish and not flounder. And I think that's where, and again, I'll pay tribute to Mick Veitch. We had a very comprehensive policy that we took to the last election, and it was about providing some small grant support to cooperatives, and that was the important first step. But just as importantly, it was about providing that business development and governance advice, which we know can be such an impediment to people who want to who come up with a good idea. I mean, I think it's been a consistent theme across the panellists this morning about the hoops that you have to go through when you're working with government or trying to get things off the ground. So I think if we could have a specific unit, and that was our policy at the last election, to have a specific unit designed to actually support that work instead of trying to hinder it. Now, obviously that we've seen some opportunities across regional and country New South Wales, but I do think, and this has certainly been the experience in the city over the last year or over the last sort of 15 months of the pandemic, that people are looking more locally. They are looking more to their neighbourhoods and to their communities, and I think that that's really fertile ground for co-ops to be working with. As I said, this morning's panel is obviously addressing two of those notoriously difficult areas of public policy, being housing affordability and energy. And I think this week we've seen the New South Wales government try to address housing supply as being part of it, now that they're walking away from their land tax proposal, which was really just putting an annual tax on the family home. But we've seen prices rise in Sydney by 9.3% since April last year. At the same time, we've actually seen housing rise by a similar amount, by 9% in the region. So we're seeing it. This is a problem that we are confronting right across the board. We're seeing it in the regions for the first time, perhaps as much as the cities. And we heard this morning about all of the innovations overseas. Now, Australia does seem to be notoriously slow in adopting these, and we've seen that in other parts of the housing industry, whether it's build to rent. But we are getting there, I think, is the good news. And I think with committed individuals, I was really impressed with Carmen's presentation, specifically about how we can be finding ways to address, to use co-ops to address housing affordability. And I think that this latest record growth is just going to force us to be innovative, to find new solutions. I, of course, as a Labor member, I'm a little bit cynical about how much the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals will be able to do it. Now, it's true, in 2012 they passed the Cooperatives Law during that UN International Year of Cooperatives, but we have seen a decline in the numbers since then, from 680 to roughly 600. And I just say this to you, I know, and the Labor Party knows, that with strong support, with the right support, co-ops can play an important role, providing support within communities, but also stimulating economic growth and addressing these key public policy challenges. So with that, I think that's enough from me. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a very valuable opportunity and a really useful learning experience for me in my first week as a shadow minister. But I certainly have a lot to learn, but I'm looking forward to being part of that process and certainly engaging with the Federation, but with all of you as well, to develop and to find ways that we can make cooperatives work better and more effectively in New South Wales.
Thanks so much, Courtney. It's lovely to have you here. So on to the Q&A section of the panel. So I'd love to invite, if anyone has any questions, to pop down to the microphones and introduce yourself and where you're from first, just for my sake, because I'm new. But yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, hi, John Shield here from Narara Eco Village Co-op. Just a quick question for Greg Hayes. I noticed you said all the directors go out, I think 1 year, get completely replaced. I'm just wondering how the corporate memory works with that. Do you have a staggered exit or not?
Yeah.
It's as usual a voluntary position as a director. There's less people to step up to the role, and usually we call the directors coordinators because we give them a title of internal environmental coordinator, land management, roads coordinator. So there's jobs that go with directors, and usually they get into the burnout after 1 year, and they don't want the pressure. But we always find someone to step up to the role. So there's not exactly... That's in one cooperative. In the other cooperative, there's a lot of internal division, and they see the directors as a powerful position. So there's a lot of competition to be a director, and that kind of overshadows the members' input, and it doesn't work in the end. So is that the answer?
Any other questions from the floor? Yep, go ahead. Just come down to the mic.
Hi, yeah, I've got a question for Carmen. It was just about, I work in the disability sector, and so there's a lot of housing options that are coming through with the NDIS for independent living, supported independent living and specialist disability accommodation. And particularly with specialist disability accommodation, it seems that there's a lot of investment to build these buildings for people with significant needs to live in. And you talked about a model of having a couple of accessible houses in a co-op sort of setup. It sounded like a really good environment because a lot of the long-term goals of the NDIS are around getting people with disabilities to be part of communities, and that's a big challenge. So yeah, I just thought if you'd looked into our SDA.
We have looked into working with Silk, which is a supported living co-op. Supported independent living co-op. We found again that we weren't really set up at this stage for actually delivering the whole package that goes with being an SDA provider. So it's on our radar, and it's something that we'll keep as part of our work program, but we just don't think we're set up with all the care services, the ability to bring that in at the moment. But yeah, we think there's a lot of synergy between the cooperative model, particularly some of the people we've been dealing with are family members of people with who are on NDIS, and they want to set their family members up into a community that's going to be able to support them in the long term. So yeah, we think that the models have synergy, we're just not quite there yet.
we've got another questioner coming up. If you don't mind introducing yourself, that would be great.
Okay. I live in a co-op for 26 years now. Anyway, this question is about the presentation of Carmen stating that the properties are still not titled. Okay. In what way can the shadow minister facilitate the processing of this desire of every cooperative to have a title?
Straight to the hot seat.
Yeah, so I'll answer that for you, Sen. So the problem that this shadow minister has is that the properties are owned by Land and Housing Corporation, so that falls into a different portfolio. And I think within the room we know that it's seen as a government asset. It's not necessarily seen as a community asset. And that's a change of thinking that needs to happen in the long term, that they're community assets, and we would love the title, as you know, so we can leverage that to borrow to build more co-ops.
I mean, I know that we are certainly aware of this issue, and it was actually a previous Labor policy was to transfer the title of community housing, transfer the title to community housing providers, and I think that that was in the recognition that it might be seen by the government as an asset, but the government is certainly not keeping up with its end of the bargain. And so if we do allow not-for-profits and community housing providers to actually step into that space when they are doing really interesting and innovative work, we can actually support that and allow them to leverage that future investment. So obviously, as we head towards the next election, we'll need to be considering that issue. But I think certainly what Carmen's talked to me about this morning, I'm keen for you to come and talk to our shadow. We've got a new shadow minister for housing. I think we can be talking about these kinds of issues and trying to come up with ways to actually have constructive policy solutions to find a way forward.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, we've got Scotty here, the one person I know.
Yeah, g'day. Scotty Foster from Co-Canberra. I'm wondering what's the makeup of the rent that co-op housing gets? Like, is it all spent on maintenance, or is it spent on this and that? Because I'm thinking if there is any spare, you could certainly use it as a payback. We're using in our pre-power renewable energy model a prepayments model where members can pay up front, and that will pay for infrastructure. So it could be anything, could be housing, could be renewable energy, which is what we're doing. But then as people pay their bills, part of that goes back to paying back that investor with quite a good return, better than superannuation. So this is the sort of model that could be used in housing. And is there enough room in the rent? Is there any surplus or anything like that within what the rent is being paid for?
There is. So what and that's what I was talking about before. So the rent covers administration, maintenance, and we do have a small operating cash flow, and that's what we're using to pay off loans to do new projects. But I think that's one of the perceived benefits of a mixed equity model is that tenants could actually be part owners almost of their property, and they could receive either a lower rental. I think Greg was talking about people getting, credits for working, which we don't do, but it could be a lower rental based on the proportion of the property that you have invested in. But yeah, there's got to be models there. We've just got to find them.
All right, so I think you can hear the ensemble rehearsing there, but I think we've got a bit of time for a few more questions because we started a little bit late. So yeah, Peter.
Yeah, in fact, what's happening is, of course, this is the Greater Sydney Ensembles. It's a quintet, and they'll be playing at lunch. So when we complete here, which will be, I guess, in a few minutes, to grab your sandwich and then go and be part of that. And I'm just intrigued in that sense because I remember that Ravi Shankar said about the best part of the orchestra he found was when they tuned up. But that's a different cultural mix on that one. The question I've got, which is really for everyone on the floor, and it starts a bit with Louise's point, where we saw such a variation in the percentages of cooperative housing, but in that sense about the whole context around community ownership. Now, whether it's ownership of an energy company or whether it's ownership of a community hall. So the question I've got with everybody in that is, what would be the one thing that would increase or to increase our capacity to have a greater community ownership, whether it be in community housing, community assets, etc.
Okay, would anyone like to lead on that one?
Certainly with the solar farm, what we're aiming to do is pay a dividend of around 5%, fully franked, to investors. That's built into our business plan. So that's a pretty good incentive to invest.
My answer would be that I think the benefits of the cooperative sector are still a little bit invisible outside the cooperative sector. So whenever, I talk to a local council about what the opportunities are, a lot of them, apart from ones that already have co-ops and know that they exist, they don't understand that there is a vehicle, there's a legal entity that can be used to achieve a lot of things. The legislation is available and people just aren't aware of that it's there or how to use it.
It strikes me awareness would be the fundamental thing. The issues that we're talking about this morning are really difficult, like I said, really difficult issues to solve. Energy, housing affordability, these are ones that are confronting every level of government, but yet it's amazing that there's almost this simple, timeless solution, but just not many people know about it. So I think that that's certainly a role that we can all play in improving awareness.
Yeah, and I guess building on that, the awareness amongst the industry as well, and also getting to the point about investment, looking at the ways that we get things like ethical investors into the space and things like the super funds funding something like common equity if it had title to then do a mix of affordable housing options at a range of price points. So I think because we've seen just this oversubscription and this interest that's out there in the market, but people constantly feeling like they have to reinvent the wheel every time they're trying to do this. So I think getting that awareness, getting the sector to actually understand it, whether that's through getting the Property Council on board or the Housing Industry Association, so these massive sector agencies that have got such incredible clout in our political landscape, because real estate in particular is just so overinflated and such a massive part of our economy. Thinking about where we find allies to help build this awareness so that it's not just, well, if I'm going to have a house, I can rent or I can own, and that's it. And if you're trying to think about anything else, it's an uphill battle. So looking at the role of the sector and the industry in actually helping to diversify this and raise awareness and get people aware that there are other things out there, and getting all of those other industries and allied sort of sectors and providers on board as well. Greg, if you want to...
with low cost rural land sharing, if you got the land sells it gets the people in because it's visual and tactile, and then they don't know about the cooperative model and the fact that you can have multiple houses on rural land, not one house per 100 acre. You can have up to 80 houses in those two different shires. So and they don't realise what the cooperative model means, that you don't get title to your individual bit of land, the co-op owns the land. And the reason why that's important is that government bodies only want to deal with a single entity. They don't want to deal with 80 entities. So, and you can't get a loan from the bank because you got no title. So it's, I hope that answers the question.
All right, so I think we're going to do one last question from you, Greg, to wind things up.
Yeah, look, the elephant in the room here is superannuation. The whole economy is sitting on something like $3 trillion worth of superannuation that's out there inflating the share market, inflating the property market and doing all these outrageous things. Why can't these funds be redirected to cooperative housing and the cooperative model that actually creates and retains wealth instead of being an extractive philosophy? So it's probably just a comment, but I think that it goes across all levels of government, local, state and federal, to really get behind this and understand we've got to release this money that's tied up in superannuation in some way. So if we can have another class of assets that are allocated for superannuation and that can go into that, I think that would be absolutely fantastic.
Okay, wonderful. I'll take that as a comment as well. So wrapping up today, thank you so much for everyone for coming and sitting in and listening, and so much to the panellists for all your excellent insights on.
Do we have time for one more question?
Mini question? Is that okay, Peter? Yeah.
Just a question for Greg. Just on your last point about not being able to get loans, how did you how did you get around that? Because that's something we've been interested in too, like in terms of if you're diversifying the model, then it's not recognised by lending bodies. So how do you, what did you guys do? How did you?
When I mentioned loans, that once the land's bought and the co-operatives started, it's loans to build the houses. Yeah. But to actually get the whole enterprise up and going, you have to find land for sale, and while it's up for sale, you have to raise the membership and the money comes in to buy the land. So it's a bit of a time-conscious project. There's no help from anyone. It's just collective real estate investment.
Yeah, so people fund their own.
Yeah, they fund the co-op on the dream that it will take off.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
No worries, especially challenging now with the housing market I'm mentioning. So wrapping up and doing a big plug for the next session, so you know what's coming up. We're about to go off and have our yummy lunch and listen to the ensemble, the quintet. And then afterwards at 1:30 we have communications and social media marketing from me. Oh, I don't know, room 2 and 3, that's with me. And we've got the fabulous Sam Byrne running the second session of the governance training in room 4 and 5. And we have stories, cooperative stories in the Heritage Room, which sound fantastic. So we've got lots of co-op sharing, but we also have consultants and facilitators. The Grove is Open and Mercury Co-op. So yeah, pick your fave and get along to them and enjoy your lunch. Thanks so much.